business landscape. For over 40 years, we have strived to develop and implement the technology solutions businesses need to thrive. We have grown, evolved, and spread our wings over the years, evolving from a trusted South African ICT partner into one of the continent's largest systems integrators, a giant in the digital space. BCX is a subsidiary within the Telkom Group and a digital transformation partner for enterprises and public sector organizations in various industries and sectors. We operate across South Africa, Botswana, Mozambique, Namibia, the UK and Zambia. From mining, oil, gas and financial services to commerce, healthcare, telecoms, technology, retail and the public sector. BCX develops and implements the technology solutions that power the South African economy. We connect South Africans to Africa and beyond, securely providing the technology and services that businesses use to create, innovate, and reimagine how they serve their customers. Our cloud computing solutions enable collaborative workspaces, connecting people and things, enabling you to work wherever you are. Big data analytics solutions turn information into knowledge and help you solve your real business problems. We are inspired by our people, passionate about transformation, and committed to our clients and their customers. Reimagine evolution, reimagine excellence, reimagine growth. BCX, giving your business the power to grow.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to stage your MC, Gugulethu Mfuphi.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to South Africa's biggest board meeting, the 2023 Directors Event. It's a real pleasure to have you all present with us here this morning. Warm bodies in the room, and of course those of you who are joining us virtually online in order to engage in critical conversations that we hope to unpack here today. While for many of you who are present here, you'd be well aware that now in its 9th iteration, the Directors Event is often focused on pertinent issues that impact all of you here as leaders of organizations, institutions, and as South African citizens. And this time around, we're going to focus on the theme and impact of sustainability and unpacking what this fully means within the South African business context. Now, for many of us, we're well aware that business has often been encouraged to operate in a sustainable manner, making sure that there's an impact on its environment, on governance issues, as well as sustainability, looking at a social impact. But for many of us, when we evaluate and interrogate ESG and what that fully means, locally and abroad, we often left wanting. And we question just exactly how it is that as business leaders, we all are able to fully unpack, unearth, and most importantly, find results from the focus on ESG. So this morning, in a world where many of us woke up to negative news headlines about business confidence earlier this week, waning GDP, struggling company results on the back of the energy crisis in South Africa, judging by your body language, I can tell that we're all worried. We're slouched forward, our heads are down, we've got grave concerns as to how we're going to reinvigorate this economy. But I do want to encourage you today that as we deep dive into many of these conversations, hearing from a number of speakers and representatives in the room, engaging through our question and answer session, and of course interacting during the breaks that will be present today, that we leave here not just having had a conversation, but really ensuring that following the conversations we have, that there are consequences and actions that we are able to implement within the organizations that we serve. So, on that note, I hope that you're feeling a little bit more encouraged, a little bit more energetic, because what we are looking for today is your ongoing engagement. As we really look to interrogate many of these themes around sustainability, we'll traverse across a spectrum of themes, looking at the social impact that business can have within the South African environment, taking a look at the ongoing energy crisis and how best we really seek to sort and find solutions in that particular realm, and of course making sure that technology is also used as a key enabler to leverage the growth and development that we require. Because when it does come to sustainability, I think it's very clear that dirty hands, dirty fuels, and dirty tricks in South Africa will no longer be tolerated. So we're looking forward to having you join us for this conversation, and of course, understanding how many of you as corporate leaders will certainly be able to make a difference. But before we do unpack more details into today's program, as always, we have to get through a few of the house rules. Now, 3 years ago, when we were all just thumbnails on our computer screens, you had the liberty of having your phone around, taking a quick call, typing a quick message, leaving the room, coming back and forth as you please. But for today, those of you who are present with us in the room, we do kindly request that you do keep your cell phones on silent, just to minimize any disruption to the various speakers who will be present here today. We also, though, strongly encourage you to keep your phones around, because as we know, a message can only be shared if it is dispersed across the world. And most importantly, for those who are not present here with us today, to be able to listen, hear, and read what it is that we've discussed. So we'd like to encourage you to make use of social media. And we do have a hashtag that we will be using today. The official hashtag is #ST_Directors Event. #ST_Directors Event. And we strongly encourage you to make use of social media platforms to alert the world as to what it is that we're discussing here today. Of course, we'd also like to extend our thanks and gratitude to our sponsors who have made it possible for this event to take place today. BCX as a key technology enabler, we'd like to thank you for your ongoing partnership and support. Also not forgetting the ongoing partnership and support that we have with the Institute of Directors in South Africa. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be quite an interactive session. So I see that we're all on our best behavior once again, hands in our laps, taking out our phones politely, sipping on our tea and coffee quietly, but this is a conversation and works two ways. What we'd like to strongly encourage you to do, especially those of you who are here in the room, is to actively participate in asking your questions, some of which will be taken live. However, we are limited and restricted due to time, so we will ask that you keep it punchy. However, if you happen to be camera shy and maybe want to share some of your opinions and views more discreetly, we'd like to encourage you to whip out your phones. Whip out your phones, please, ladies and gentlemen. As you will note that we do have a QR code that will be available on the side of the two screens that we have here in the room. Those of you who might be allocated slightly further to the back, if you take a look at the television screens on either side of the room, you'll notice a QR code at the bottom of the screen. Open up your camera, feel free to click on the link and of course scan the QR code, and this will direct you to a chat facility. This is where you'll be able to direct your questions to the various moderators, speakers, as well as panel discussions for the day that we have lined up today. But of course, in a world of technology, we're not leaving those of you who are online participants out of this conversation. So we strongly encourage you as well to make use of the chat facility that you see on your screen. This is where we'll be able to ensure that we'll do our best to ask and respond to many of your questions as possible, given the time that has been allocated. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm keen for us to get this conversation started, but we need to set the mood. I think it's clear that it's tough. But perhaps we do need to do a quick litmus test just to evaluate where your confidence levels as individuals and business leaders in the room actually sit at the moment. Glass half full, please raise your hands up. Oh, okay, I see a few of you, and I'm assuming the rest of you glass half empty. Maybe let's raise your hands up just for a visual impact for us to get a good measure in the room. Glass half empty? Okay, undecided and still unsure? Okay. Glass half, no glass. Oh, glass empty. There's an option. Okay, we have a hand. And why we do this is really for us to evaluate by the end of today if we'll still have a glass empty, if we'll still have a glass that is half full, and perhaps if we'll still have those of you who remain uncertain. Because what we aim to do today is to shift the needle, encourage you in the conversations that we have, and most importantly, walk away with tangible insights and outputs that we can implement in our day-to-day lives. So I trust that the energy has been set, the tone is understood, and that most importantly, your ongoing encouragement will continue to take place here today. However, as we look to commence today's conversation, of course, we need to set the tone and the theme by getting clarity on why this 9th iteration of the Directors Event remains so critical to business leaders like yourself today. Allow me to welcome to the front of the stage to share his opening address, our first speaker for today, the editor of the Sunday Times, Sthembiso Msomi.
Good morning and welcome to the 9th year of the Directors event, proudly presented by the Sunday Times and PCX. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry, the speech is repeated what's written there. It's wonderful to have everyone with us today for the 9th year of this important event that brings together business leaders and policymakers in striving for solutions for some of the country's most pressing problems. It will be my most fervent hope that each year sees the list of issues of the country getting shorter and even getting resolved. But with a world that is fast evolving and with South Africa needing to keep pace, the job of building a country that is good for business and good for its people continues unabated. There can be no time to rest. The country is still gripped by an infrastructure and energy crisis that is playing Russian roulette with our people and their futures. We have an election year on the horizon, yet we are still plagued by corruption that remains rife and where it is inevitably down to corporate South Africa to navigate the political potholes to keep our economy afloat. The contribution of business and of every person present in this room today is therefore critical in keeping the lights on at the end of the tunnel. As many of you will already know, global calls for business to be conducted in a clean and sustainable way is something that dominates in local boardrooms as well. Today we'll be asking what sustainable business means for South Africans. What is the social impact and what does it mean for SMMEs and entrepreneurs? We'll look at how the infrastructure and energy challenges can be addressed, and we'll unpack the important role of technology in building a society that can thrive in a world that is increasingly switched on and connected. We have remarkable minds in this room today to help steer towards solutions. Thank you once again to PCX for their ongoing support of the Directors event. Have a wonderful morning, and thank you for your commitment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tembi. So really appreciate the words of opening welcome. I thought you might give us a hint as to what we can expect in the Sunday papers this upcoming week. You also don't know? Okay. Well, that's why we'll keep our anxiety going till Sunday morning to ensure that we do get to read up on the latest news and developments. Of course, as been mentioned, BCX is a key partner and sponsor of today's discussion. Most importantly, well regarded as a key technology enabler in South Africa, it's also done its bit when it comes to transformation. I understand recently seeing an adjustment in its BBBE scorecard, now as a level 1 contributor, largely related to adjustments that were made within the procurement department as well as management representation, with an increase in black females being recognized there. But to tell us more, not only about the role, function of BCX, but of course its key partnership and sponsorship of the Directors event, please warmly welcome to the front of the stage, Mr. Jonas Bogoshi, the CEO of BCX.
Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. And thank you very much, Gugu. A warm welcome to all of you attending the 9th Directors event today. As Gugu said, we are a proud sponsor of the event, and this is the 5th year of supporting the event, the 5th year of supporting the event. We started a long time ago, before COVID. Everything was physical. And a few years ago, it was all virtual. And I mentioned last year that back at the height of COVID, we were recording everything. So there was a time when we were recording with Gugu, and I never met Gugu. So because we were recording at different times, I was referring to a chair saying, "Thank you, Gugu." And the guys at the back will then combine all these things. Last year we had a semi-virtual one where most of the speakers were here, and everybody else was online. And today it is virtual. We've got about 80 odd people in here, and about 800 people online. This is actually very good. How things change over a 5-year period, how things change, and this is becoming normal. We continue to support the event because we as BCX believe it's a good platform. It's a good platform to have leaders across South Africa to meet and to talk about issues that are affecting us as people, affecting our companies, and also affecting the country. And we'll continue to do that. And we've got some interesting people here today. We've got Mr. Maroja here and Dr. Padi Lehotla. We were talking with Dr. Lehotla that the first time I met him was back in 1995. I was a salesperson trying to sell solutions for the census back in the day. So I've known him for a long time, and I've always, every time I went to sell to him, marveled at the way he was thinking. He reminded me of my professors back at university. And maybe I marveled at that because deep down I harbor a secret. And that secret is that I wanted to be a maths professor. But I saw the light, Dr. Lehotla. I saw the light and changed. As I was thinking last night, I was wondering whether to come with a colorful jacket. I think it's a good thing that I didn't do it because you are not wearing your normal yellow jacket today. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, really welcome. The theme for today's event is about sustainable business, and we are linking it to attainment of ESG goals. I think I can safely assume that most people in here agree with the ESG principles. I can also safely assume that a number of us either have adopted ESG policy or have got the ESG framework, and we are busy implementing it. So I think where we are today, we've got people who are pro-ESG. But the truth is that ESG has detractors. It has critics. It has backlash. And the views of the critics are quite they are quite vocal, and their views are gaining momentum. And the criticism, it's anything between ESG is nothing but a woke movement gone totally out of control, to some who say that ESG principles and measurements today have encouraged greenwashing where there's substance over form. So you've got all those two, and those two camps. And I thought to myself, but what is going on? What are people discussing around ESG? And I needed to get an expert opinion. So I needed to find an expert opinion, and you can guess where I went. I went to ChatGPT. I went to ChatGPT, and why ChatGPT? Because it is nothing but a reflection of the discourse taking place today, whether on social media, in books, in articles, etc. Dr. Maki Janch is here, who is one of the panelists. Back in the day, took me through the do's and don'ts of ChatGPT, the good, the bad, and ugly, to make sure that I don't code fictitious issues. So, Dr. Maki, I hope I've done a good job. So, yes, I went to ChatGPT to check what are the people discussing who are critics of the ESG. In terms of the gospel according to ChatGPT, a number of people believe that focus on ESG has got a tendency to distort markets, misallocation of capital. Because when you invest based on ESG results, you are likely to misallocate resources. Those are the people who say that business exists to generate profit and maximize shareholder value, and any diversion of the resources to anything else is not good for business. So that's one part of the people according to the gospel. According to the gospel, the other set of people are saying that ESG does not take into account the uniqueness, the special area or the development of regions, industries, and countries. And therefore, it may disproportionately affect as an example, developing countries. That maybe developing countries will require to invest in technologies or industries that are culprits of pollution. But if you put ESG targets on that, what you will do is to hamper them from attaining growth and getting people out of poverty. When you think about that, the question that you ask is, are the people who are critics of ESG today, are they lunatics? Are they bigots? Are they fanatics? Not quite. Not quite. But does it mean that we should compromise? Isn't ESG about ethical imperatives? Yes, it is. But you see, the question is not either or. It's about the third alternative, a third alternative. Because absolutely correct, the key focus of business is to meet customer requirements, generate profit, and maximize shareholder value. But surely, that does not mean optimizing quarterly results. It does not even mean that you want to perform or show good results for a year or two. By definition, shareholder return means long-term. Sure, emerging countries must invest to make sure that they grow their economies, they get people out of poverty, and they improve the standards of living. But surely, that can be attained by mortgaging the future. So it's not either or, it's about the third alternative. Because you see, what is at stake is not, are you for ESG or against it? I didn't go this time to ChatGPT to find the answer, because the question is not either or. It's about the third alternative. The alternative is about the future. It's about long term. What is at stake is the question that we must ask. Are the decisions that we are making, actions we are taking, creating positive results for our next generation or negative? That is what at stake. And when we discuss that, when we have the end in mind, then we can come with a better result. So today, ladies and gentlemen, as we meet, let us decide what kind of legacy we want to leave. Thank you very much and welcome.
The 2023 5th Annual BCX Digital Innovation Awards. BCX Digital Innovation Awards have celebrated and recognized digital innovation excellence in South Africa since 2019. Now in its 5th year, BCX is proud to announce the 2023 awards are officially open for entries. South African SMEs, corporates and public sector organizations can enter. Show us the future and stand a chance to be named the 2023 BCX Digital Innovator of the Year. Entries close on 31 July 2023. All entries are free. Enter online at www.bcx.co.za or follow hashtag BCXDIA.
Thank you again to Mr. Bukhoshi for giving us that very pertinent discussion there. And I think one of the key aspects that you highlighted that we need to walk away with today is what legacy will we leave behind? And we do see this, right, in the day-to-day activities, in the data points that do come out, in the company results and financials that are often reported. It's always reflective, in hindsight. And this is the same with legacy, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to life, and of course the understanding of how countries operate. Well, this does take us to our keynote speaker for today, someone who is known to be very direct and truthful about the reality that we live in South Africa. You might be well aware that, as he indicated this morning, he believes that perhaps there is no glass. But perhaps through this conversation and keynote presentation we'll have today, we'll fully understand how best it is that we need to build sustainable businesses in South Africa. Taking a look at the metrics, understanding the economic challenges, the energy crisis that we are currently in, and of course, leveraging technology to enable us to build sustainable businesses in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, please warmly welcome to the front of the stage a man who typically would be easily spotted in a yellow suit, but opted for a different outfit this morning. Badile Hohla, who is the former Statistician General of South Africa.
Thank you very much, Mayor Gugu, Ntate Bukhoshi. I thought I should just show the yellow suit to satisfy your curiosity. And Rocha, ladies and gentlemen. I've been asked to do a number of things. And what I want to start by saying is about tools of foresight and future-proof in order to address the skills gap, which is the assignment I was given, addressing high unemployment, especially among the youth, the role of small and medium businesses in addressing this crisis, what support should be given, why young people hold the key to unlocking South Africa's economic potential, the importance of adopting sustainable and responsible business models in line with the UN SDGs. And I come to the conclusion that all these are not achievable, and what has to change, and conclusions and recommendations. Let me introduce to you my Economic Modeling Academy. It's a year old today, and it looks at how we actually get people trained in tools of foresight. We are based at Gibbs from 3 days ago. Well, the South African problems can be defined in this kind of model that I'm putting before you, which looks at the tools of foresight, future-proof. The most important among these is this one that looks at the macroeconomic, microeconomic, and linked micro-macro, and then looks at provincial, district, and municipalities. We don't have such a tool in South Africa that connects provincial blocks, rest of South Africa blocks, national blocks, microeconomic model simulation, and model outputs. This work has been done over a number of years, almost 20, 30 years, and is grounded on South Africa's statistics data. 90% of this is based on that and projects forward. So if we are to address the skills gap, it's impossible under these circumstances. Children's sin is to like to go to school and they have to cross rivers. Addressing the skills gap, this is Cape Town then when children could ride on a train, and it is Cape Town now. This is what the performance of skills are. On this side, we are measuring percentage of people that qualify in degrees, and this side, we are looking at time. If the graph goes down, it means we are doing very badly. If it goes up, it means we are improving. If it's laying flat, it means we are just doing. Let's just see what is happening. Now you can see the blacks start dropping. It means the majority population is not actually performing. So it's impossible to think about skills gap closing. It's impossible. It's widening. Over there, at this point, for every white in proportionate to their size, for every one black that qualifies proportionately within this group, 6 whites do. When over here, in the 1979, for every one black, there would be 1.2 whites. So it's impossible to close the skills gap. Now, if you look at this graph here, in 2008, there were 4,844 employed. By 2022, only 4.4 million in a growing population. West still, for this year, 1,670,000 youth at this age were employed, and now it's only 1,050,000 in 2022. So it's impossible, therefore, to think about addressing unemployment. It's getting worse. On the role of small businesses and medium businesses, the crisis here between 2011 and 2018, or rather between 2011 and 2018, we see there's an improvement. But all in all, it's too little, too late. Only 22% or 32% is in small, medium businesses. In the advanced countries, they're about 70%, and big business constitutes only 20%. So it's impossible. For educational, for the youth, 15 to 24, their disastrous outcomes are driven by lack of education attainment, not in education and in employment. 50% of their futures is driven by that. These futures that are bad are driven by that. Now, the importance of adopting sustainable and development, that also is very difficult to achieve. Why? Because South Africa has too high concentration, and that concentration is racially based. If you look at this, large businesses and private services, that's about 70% of all businesses. And they are concentrated. Blacks are street workers, and as well as, even specialist shops are in amongst whites. So the concentration in a racial group makes it impossible to think of a different future. Now, I want to put this assessment matrix here. This assessment matrix says to us, if stakeholder expectation is very high and stakeholder satisfaction is very low, then you are a failing state. If stakeholder satisfaction is low and stakeholder expectation is high, you are a failed state. It's low and low is failed state. When stakeholder satisfaction is high, but expectation is low, then you have respite. You are an emergent state. The idea is to come to this quadrant. And according to what I see now, it's impossible where you can actually talk about a developmental state. We are actually playing in this space. This is where South Africa is, in this space, where expectations are high, but satisfaction is very low. We are in this space, we are almost a failing state. Now, the belly and brain of the looting state actually finds that those who we rely on are accused number one. Now, just to give you a reflection why econometric modeling matters. In case we forgot that in 1992, the Montclair scenario said, will negotiation settle? Will there be settlement? Will the transition be rapid? And the government policies sustainable? It was yes, yes, and yes, yet democracy was not inclusive, and democracy was inclusive, but growth was not. That was the 1992 settlement, 1996 settlement that created GEAR. We have all these plans, 14 of them, all in all. Here I just display 8. And it's 2020, we are now 28 years. Every 2 years, a try for the nation. Now, what we must cast our eyes on is when the onset of COVID started. For brevity's sake, Business for South Africa had a very good target. 5.2 average GDP growth, employment creation 8 million, unemployment rate 15%, inequality Gini 0.43, and of course debt to GDP ratio 60. ADRS, Applied Development Research, that built these models, had almost similar targets. And when they approached government, what government should have done with Business for South Africa in 2020 should have been lock them in there and lock them with government and say, boys and girls, when you show me that this is achievable, I'll come and open. Yesterday, we are back to the same gimmicks when business meets with the president. I don't know whether they have those targets. But these targets are quite different from government targets of 2 to 3.5 employment addition, to treasury of 1 million, to growth that is not even stated. So the government is blind. It's flying blind, colleagues. There's no future. There are no tools that tell us what the future could look like. Now, the problem with Business for South Africa is that they were saying these are the targets, but no path was cleared. But for ADRS, which has now created EMA, there was a path. And that's the key difference. And in that path, we say that there are 6 pillar policy of looking at macroeconomic policies, social policy reforms, microeconomic policies, trade and industry, private sector and international support, provincial growth and development. These models are heterodox models that give power to people, that people have agency. And this 6-pillar policy, I can show you the brief. We consulted with civil society. And as far as civil society is concerned, They agree that macroeconomic policy should shift. They agree that social policy should shift, but particularly looking at land restitution. They look at making bread available. They didn't have anything on trade and industry, private sector, or provincial GDP. That's civil society. In as far as treasury and government is concerned, they agree on pillar 3, 4, 5, and 6, pillar 3 and 4. And they don't agree on policy 1 of macroeconomic shifts that have to be instigated and the social policy. Recently, of course, they agreed to big, but then they didn't agree to this. So we have a serious problem of conception of how the economy should perform. We have a serious problem of agreeing on things. So yesterday, business went and saw to see the president. The question is, what has changed between when we are facing COVID and what has happened, has changed now? The problem is that there are no instruments that bring new business and government together. I've been in government, I know. Now, when we think about ESG, we really have to think about the capability approach that provides and ensures inclusive development. We have vector of goods and services that the democracy has talked about. But we have to define the means of achieving them. We've got capabilities, vectors for potential functioning, which gives us the freedom to achieve. We need that freedom to achieve. Do we have that freedom? Does small business have that freedom? And then, of course, a vector that looks at what has been achieved. If we design these tools in a way that has future-proof, then the debates as to whether ESG is good or ESG is bad almost diminish and converge to one that says we actually need to ensure inclusive development. We don't have these kinds of tools. At Oxford Poverty and Human Development, where I'm a research associate, we look at this and particularly look at multidimensional poverty, particularly among the employees. We measure that, and following on the good example of Costa Rica, where in that bank they measured this, but then retooled that, measured that amongst their employees, and then retooled that to the whole system. And that has improved how Costa Rica deals with multidimensional poverty across Costa Rica. In South Africa, we have the data that measures multidimensional poverty, but the government doesn't use it. So, why econometric modeling? It matters because you can follow a path, and that path consists of specific policies. And in combining those policies, you will see what outcomes will be. At Indlamiti, we implemented this using ADRS models. And in the Indlamiti scenarios, we could distinctly look at Isibuzwa, we could distinctly look at Guaragwara, and we could distinctly look at Naila Walk. The path we are following here in South Africa is certainly going to end us up in Guaragwara. Whether you have the ERRP or the DDM model, when you ask anyone who is involved in that, how many jobs will come, they'll tell you, they'll twiddle their fingers and go for a guess because they don't have a model that can tell you how those things can be achieved. And until we get those, until business comes together with government on tools that of foresight, it's impossible, literally impossible, to bring South Africa anywhere. If you were to ask Bale and Smarts and ask them what they intended, they'll tell you what they intended. They'll tell you how they wanted to achieve it. And they'll tell you at what point they would achieve it. And everything else then connived in their favor. We don't have that. We don't have those tools. So it's a serious problem. We have universities, we have research institutions, but ask South Africans how many jobs using this plan that we have will be created. 0. Listen to the State of the Nation address. Listen to the Minister of Finance. They all talk about inputs. No one talks about impact. The president has so much power. He must be empowered to talk about impact. But the tools are not there that can give him the ability to talk about impact and then whip everybody else in line to show that impact. Now, using this 6-pillar policy framework, using the tools of heterodoxy, on the model that I've just shown you, from macroeconomic to social reform to provincial and growth, we can show you how if we apply specific policies, what will be an outcome of that. The first, of course, growth now is less than 2%. At the time, it was still 2%, but now we are 0.2%. So we haven't modeled for the current. So if we look at state business as usual, you are looking at a 0.7% growth. And indeed, we didn't anticipate that it would be 0.2% growth. But business as usual was going to give you that. If you work on micro reforms, it will give you 0.27 percentage points on top of that percent. If you look at trade and industry, it will give you 0.38 percentage points. If you look at macro reforms, where you look at the Reserve Bank and the Treasury as actors in the economic venture of government, there where you get big things, 1.43%. And then if you look at social reforms where we have it's big in making sure that we cohere socially, but it's small in terms of increasing, but it's positive to growth. That is the big. Then if you look at, then you think the private support can come. And of course, then there will be external support. 5.7% at the time before COVID was possible to grow this country if we follow those blocks that I showed you. So let me get back to those blocks. So what are the conclusions and recommendations? The current policy regime cannot resolve the issues asked. The current policy regime cannot resolve the issues that are asked. The first question you as business and government must ask yourselves, by how much are we going to reduce unemployment and make future proof for that? You don't have the tools. There were 1,000 documents, pages, that were presented to government during COVID. Government didn't have mechanisms to absorb it. And what has happened between then and now is nitpicking. And we continue to nitpick. And then we have a crisis of energy, a crisis of that, a crisis of that. On top of a crisis of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Those crises will continue to come if we don't have a tools of. So let us take this opportunity that we gather around here, the fire, to reinstate what business had proposed, the slide I started with, and then deploy econometric modeling on the proposals. Assess whether the convergence between ADRS and business is achievable, because those were very close. And then, if it does, let's sign off on the program. Well, I'll invite you to visit GIBS for EMA program and consider EMA capacity building program, because those instruments can empower people to design models. This model that I'm talking about, the biggest one, has 12,000 simultaneous equations that run on Statistics South Africa data. So it is reflecting ourselves as South Africa. It's an econometric model that is heterodox and can actually look at poverty, can look at inequality, can look at all those variables that your CGE models that we use do not. So that poverty alleviation and unemployment alleviation are at the center of the program from a point of view of modeling, and you can predict those things and measure them at the national, provincial, district, and municipality. There's no model like that in South Africa. This could be the path that sets South Africa out of the rut. Now, if you look at this model, we have the 9 provincial blocks here, and the output of that is fixed capital formation, its production blocks, its labor markets, and of course, these are the blocks for the rest of South Africa. They are national blocks. These national blocks here are the only blocks that our guys who model have. They don't even have this labor market block. They have the prices, wages, income and expenditure, financial block. Of course, this side of poverty inequality, these micro-simulation blocks, do not exist in government. The CGE works on the basis of, my time is getting down now, The CGE works on the basis of the social accounting matrix. And the social accounting matrix is a crude instrument. And what we have doesn't have provincial, district, municipality, and the national district. So we have absence of intellect in how we do business in South Africa. We are not using tools of foresight and future-proof. Well, what we think can happen, you as business and government, ours is to actually define the needs, to politically mobilize behind those needs through an economically feasible program, and that should be delivered legally. But to do that, you need tools of foresight. Thank you very much.
Ooh, how are we feeling? Your honest opinion. You can shout out the words. Let's get your descriptions. I realize why you think that there is no glass, Dr. Lehohla, but I'm keen to actually hear just a brief response from the audience as to how you've acknowledged this information, and maybe you can shout out perspectives very briefly, just for us to get a litmus test on the data, on the information and the insight that we've received. Gloom? Concerned? Mm-hmm. Failed state? Opportunity. Hopeful. Anyone else keen to share? Eye-opening and overwhelmed. Those of you online, keep typing your thoughts as well. And the reason why we reflect on this is because it's a lot to take in. And of course, can leave us overwhelmed, discouraged, and in a very tight spot that we actually find ourselves in. And I must tell you, Dr. Lehohla, I listened to you use the word impossible to close the skills gap in South Africa. And that does take us to our next panel discussion, where we'll take a look at the reality of what has been revealed in this keynote presentation. But most of all, we know that this is a country that we need to fix. There is no other opportunity for us to perhaps just drop the ball and find other places to run away to. So we will have a panel discussion to actually unpack the concern, the depression, the overwhelmingness, the opportunity that also might exist within this particular theme in our next panel discussion. To allow you to soak in much of this information, those of you who are in the room will have a very brief 5-minute comfort break. However, we would like to encourage you to stay in the room. This is just to allow us to have an opportunity to get our panel on the stage, ensure that all the technicalities are taken care of, and from there, we'll commence with a 45-minute panel discussion, where we will unpack what opportunities it is that we can explore to make sure that we can close the skills gap. Looking at the policies that do need to be amended and changed, the ongoing participation of the private sector, and of course, ensuring that ultimately we don't become a failed state. Those of you who are joining us online will have a 5-minute breather. Please do be cognizant of watching the monitor on your screens. We will be back with the panel discussion very briefly for a rather invigorating conversation. If you have questions, please type them out now, because we will ensure that we will address them during the panel discussion. But for now, we'll see you in 5 minutes as we get our first panel ready for the stage. Welcome back to those of you joining us virtually for the 2023 Directors event. It's great to have you with us as you've caught us just in time for the beginning of our first panel discussion. To our audience members, thank you kindly as well for settling in. A gentle reminder that this particular panel discussion does afford us the opportunity for a question and answer session. We will keep it brief and try to address a few within the room. However, a gentle reminder to make use of the QR codes which have been on screen on the monitors in the room. Those of you online, make use of the chat facility as we will be asking your questions to various speakers that we have with us here today. On that note, I think one thing is quite clear. We all needed a breather, a sip of water, and a sigh after the presentation that we heard from Dr. Badile Hohla. But it's critical, right, that we get a clear understanding of where we are in terms of South Africa's economy. Yes, we're well aware of the economic challenges that we're facing, and of course, the importance of economic modeling, which has been underscored here. And this all ties back into the social impact when it comes to sustainability. So often, it's been well reported that business has highlighted and increased its focus on ESG. But some might say that we're rather heavy on the E, trying our best on the G, and completely lacking on the S. And today, this is what we're going to try to unpack in terms of the insights that will be shared from many of our business leaders who are joining me on stage. So on that note, I'd like to introduce my panels. I'll introduce all of them, starting from my far right, following which we'll give them a round of applause as we calm their nerves before we start the session. But starting on my far right is Brent Lindeque, who's the editor-in-chief of Good Things Guy, followed by Professor Lauren Graham, joining us as Associate Professor and Director for the Center for Social Development in Africa at the University of Johannesburg, followed by Dr. Maggie Jantjies, who's the Group Executive for Innovation and Transformation at Telkom, South Africa, Nazrana Sultan, Head of Strategy and Business Planning at Digital Frontiers, and right next to me is Carmel Kistasamy, Pan-Africa Head for Global Development Organizations, Pan-Africa APSA Group. Please give them a warm round of applause. Okay, so today I'm actually nervous for this panel discussion because it could go either way, especially on the back of the insights that we've heard from our keynote speaker. But I do think that it is critical that on the back of the words that have been used, that South Africa is finding itself as a failing state. We are in a position where it's impossible to close the skills gap. And another particular emphasis that was made by our keynote speaker is that we are lacking the tools in order to drive the social impact that we require. This is a harsh reality that we're facing. And I'm keen to get your perspectives from three key business leaders, naturally, just to get your understanding and response of this particular challenge. Professor Graham, let's start with you, then we'll come to you, Dr. Jantjies.
Sure. Whew. Yes. I think what Dr. Hohla has shared with us is very eye-opening. We have to take that into account. We have to address these challenges at the macro level, macro policy level. But I think what gives me sustained hope in this country, much of my work, we work at the micro level. And when we work at the micro level, we see really great examples, pockets of excellence across civil society, business, and government, believe it or not. And I think we really need to be harnessing those pockets of excellence, understanding what they're doing right, publicizing what they're doing right, and expanding that so that we're able to close this gap. And that has to happen alongside the recommendations that Dr. Hohla has shared with us this morning.
We'll touch on some of those highlights alongside the conversation. Dr. Maggie, your views?
Thank you so much, Gugu. I'm not sure if Dr. Hohla knows that he threw our script right out the window. So next time we need to force him to wear the yellow jacket because he'll be a bit more nicer to us. Mm-hmm. Well, I think he raised very important points that he highlighted there, and I'll give an example of a policy, a private partnership initiative that we had started as Telkom Group many years before I joined. This year, we're celebrating 25 years of that achievement, and it's just an example of what public-private partnership can do. We started off looking at the transformation of skills in the telecommunication sector, and there was a stark need for diversity within the sector. Mm-hmm. And through a public-private partnership, we then established what is called the Telkom Centers of Excellence. As much as they were called the Telkom Centers of Excellence, Research Centers of Excellence, it was a partnership across the sector, which said that 25 years later, where will we be in terms of skills development as a country? We've now published a report that has seen that we have over 3,600 graduates that have either an honors, master's or PhD. And largely, we were also focusing on women and diversity and people from previously disadvantaged backgrounds who could have otherwise not have gotten within the sector. What was quite personal and heartwarming for me was when we reported on the findings of this publication, I had executives coming to me who go, I'm not in the same sector, I'm in the finance sector, I benefited from this program. And if it wasn't for this, I wouldn't be sitting around this table. And I think it's just one of those examples that show that for us to actually impact South Africa at scale, it is through those partnerships that we'll be able to achieve that.
And I'm keen for us just to build up on that very briefly, because the next question would naturally be, what did you do in order to make that work? And perhaps there might be lessons and learnings that we can implement here in order to scale such initiatives and objectives.
I think being purpose-driven. There was a unit, I think central to Telkom and the evolution of Telkom against the headwinds. Over 25 years, Telkom has been through different challenges across the years, but this program has stayed. So being purpose-driven in how we want to impact and scale our impact as a group was quite important in seeing this. What we've now done is actually elevated to the group level and said, how are we going to further augment this? And gone out to other members within the sector to say, come on board and help us to keep pumping into this program.
I hear you on purpose, but I'm keen to also delve into policy. Given that we're aware that policy has been highlighted as a particular deficit that we have in the country, are there particular policies that you leveraged on to actually amplify this center of excellence that you established?
Initially, the policy was called, it was a THRIP policy, which was actually done to incentivize the investment of private sector into skills development within that, and that incentivized the growth of that. But the sustainability of that is not going to be policy. It has to be purpose-led by a company. So the sustainability of that, we had a lot of partners who began with us on the journey. Some fell off, some came on and remained. Telkom remained central to the sustainability of the program. So purpose-led and purpose-driven does matter, because where policy doesn't exist or has evolved or the management of the policy sits somewhere else, it is the purpose-ledness that will ensure that it gets sustained.
100%. Kama, let's come to you and perhaps bringing the two questions together, right? In your day-to-day life, ESG is your bread and butter. And you face a lot of questions as to how ABSA, as a key financial services institution across the continent, is actually addressing this particular concern. Maybe give us some insight into that, but also reflecting on some of the concerns that have been highlighted by Dr. Lehotla.
Thank you. Yes, I think Dr. Lehotla has definitely set the scene. I think a stark view of the South African environment, but what we are seeing as private sector is the narrative changing around collaboration and bringing private sector and public sector together to address some of those gaps. Google mentioned that within the private sector, we are seeing a lot of focus on ESG. And again, skewed to E, with not so much of progress made around S. From an ABSA perspective, again, our ethos is purpose-driven. And when we look at the purpose of us as a bank and as a Pan-African institution across the continent, we're focusing on empowering Africa together, one story at a time. And how are we looking to drive that? It's through the communities in which we operate. Our belief is that deep sustainable impact across the communities is through the people and having a depth of understanding of the local environment. 100%. And then overlapping that with collaboration. From an ABSA perspective, my panelists spoke about some of the work that they're doing around education. Similarly, on what we're looking to do in Africa is how do we start capacitating the local SMEs? How do we start bridging the skills gap, especially as it relates to women and youth, through an SME program locally? So from a social impact perspective, we had some great success in markets like Ghana, where we rolled out the Africa Works program. And there we partnered with the MasterCard Foundation, where we are looking at developing 5,000 jobs over the next 3-year period to specifically focus on agri, digital, tech, and again, slanted towards women and youth. Yeah. And what we have seen since the inception of the program is that we have created 16,000 jobs within the Ghanaian economy. We have been able to develop and build long-term progress within the agri sector as well through the program. So I think that what we are seeing as APSA is that partnerships on the ground, working with local entities is integral to developing the social impact on a sustainable basis.
Definitely. And these are some of the insights that we do want to deep dive into, because it does appear as though there are pockets of excellence, right, that we need to shine a light on, but most importantly also amplify and leverage on to ensure that the success is actually experienced right across the board. Brent and Nazrana, I've kept you quiet for way too long. And what we've heard from two of your counterparts here on the panel is that purpose, people, and of course, policy does play a critical need. But I'm keen to go back to purpose because it ties into the needs analysis that you highlighted, Dr. Lehotla, as one of the key enablers that we need to understand. Society needs, and of course, ensuring that leadership and the resources are also available. And when it comes to understanding, perhaps this is where the waters get muddied. Because when we say sustainability, some say it's ESG, others say it's shared value, others say it's CSI. And so often these terms get used interchangeably, and that's why we find that there's a challenge in terms of the measurement of what the objectives are to attain sustainability, and of course how it is that we ensure that we're able to track the progress that we identify here. Brent, I'm keen to understand from your perspective, when you work with NPOs, work with businesses, you unpack good news about the country really, do we find that there is a mismatch in terms of the measurement and even the understanding of sustainability in South Africa?
100%, and I think the reason for that is because we've got so many challenges. There's so many different complex challenges that we face as South Africans, whether it's skills or education or poverty, whatever that is, it's difficult to measure something in the same way when we're dealing with so many complex variables. For me, when I look at how we measure sustainability and where we should be putting a lot of our effort into as South Africans when it comes to passion and sustainability, I believe it's education. I believe that education is key to creating a better South Africa. An example, so last year I worked with a company called The Unlimited. They've been around for about 30 years. And just under the radar, they'd realized that ECD was a problem in our country. Majority of children that come from impoverished backgrounds, by the time they get to school, they can't read or write as their counterparts could that might go to a private school. And by 8 or 9 years old, they still can't. So they decided to put into a program where they would create ECD centers. We used to have them many years ago. South Africa had them, and they somehow all fell away. And they've implemented these ECD centers where they've come up with the right tools, given the right books, toys, everything to make them learn correctly. And they've helped over 1 million children in the last 10 years to be school ready by the time they get to school. What that would do as you make your way through school is give you an entirely different perspective and education. So by the time you get to a matric level, you'll be able to then go to university and be employable. Yep. So I think that's for me is a key point. But to your question, how do we measure it? We can't. There's too many challenges.
I'm keen to see if there's a response. Perhaps, Nazrana, you can also give us some insight into your thoughts on the measurement of the outputs and, of course, what it is that we need to implement in terms of the inputs too.
So at Digital Frontiers, we have the vision that at least 20% of the world's future jobs will be dedicated to solving the world's problems, the world's biggest problems. And at Digital Frontiers, we believe that what are these future jobs look like? And what are they dedicated for good? So what are the jobs for good? And these jobs for good look like digital inclusion finance, climate change professionals, renewable energy professionals, gender equality change makers. And so the metrics that we want to see is that we want to create impact in Africa and the growing youth in Africa. Evidence proof from the World Economic Forum jobs report that South Africa has the bottom 25% of countries in Africa lack the skill set and in the current workforce. And so what are we doing as an online edtech? Are we creating the human connections? Are we building capacity in South Africa?
And maybe you can give us some insight there. Go ahead and take a sip of water, if you don't mind, as I fill in with this question, because you do work with a lot of international organizations, primarily in emerging markets, many of whom have similar challenges to a state like South Africa. And I'm keen to understand if, from a policy point of view, a business point of view, technology point of view, there's some learnings and lessons that we can take out from there. Go ahead.
So from a technology perspective, our digital economy is fast growing. And South Africa and President has invested a significant amount in this. And so that's propelled our digital economy. But some of the key components that we can recognize from our international competitors like India, America, and China is that they want online education to be at the forefront of education. And that includes digital skills. In South Africa and Africa, we have a language barrier. So a lot of our youth are not recognizing that and not using those platforms. The growing African population in Africa is now prevented from actually touching that because there's this misunderstanding of language barriers.
And that obviously goes back to the education system, which is a pertinent issue that I do think we need to address. And I'm hoping that we can shift gears to highlight policies that speak to both education, but also job creation opportunities. As you can tell, Professor Graham, I'm looking at you here because this is where you have a strong set of a background in understanding and unpacking perhaps policies that are in place in South Africa at the moment that we can leverage on, perhaps that can be amended in order to make sure that we address the education concern. But coupled with that, I'm hoping that you can add to this conversation by also discussing the basic employment package program that you collaborated on with government, business as well, to ensure that even for those who are not well educated, as Nasrana explains, whether it's a lack of understanding in certain disciplines, they're not left out of the job market purely because there's a lack of education, but there's still a gap for them to enter the workplace.
So I'm going to focus a little bit more on skills development and employment rather than education and employment. And I think this is where I talk about we do have these leverage points in government that we're perhaps not making effective use of. So as an example, we have the employment tax incentive that's currently in place right now. Evidence shows us that there's not a large uptake, particularly amongst small, medium enterprises.
Do we know why?
Yeah, we do, because a lot of small and medium enterprises don't actually know it exists. They feel it's too bureaucratic to apply for it and to get it. And often people who are running small businesses don't have a whole human resource division to apply for it. So how do we make these kinds of policy and programmatic interventions much more accessible to the drivers of our economy? Over 60% of employed people are employed in the SMME sector. And so it's really important that we empower this sector. And this is an example of where you have an opportunity for government, private sector, civil society to work together, where the private sector is able to take advantage of these kinds of interventions. Another example is the skills development levy. We could be using it much better than we are. So how do businesses then partner with civil society organizations that make good skills development available to young people at the local level so that they're not faced with high fees, res fees, transport costs to get to university, but they're able to access a good skills development program that's in their local community, and businesses are then able to draw from those spaces, support them through financing through the skills development levy, and draw those young people into jobs. So this pluralism of business, private sector, civil society working together and leveraging the policies that we have in place so that we're better able to create skills development and employment opportunities.
Trick question. So the policies are there. We know that we can implement them. We're finding that some businesses are not aware of them and perhaps others are not using them adequately. Do we have an understanding as to what the challenge is here in the adoption and the uptake? Or is this just a box-ticking exercise for some entities?
My experience I'm sure on a case-by-case basis you'll find some that it's a box-ticking exercise, but my experience of working with many partners in the private sector is that they genuinely want to make a difference. They genuinely understand that making South Africa work is good for business. And so I don't think it's a box-ticking exercise. I think it's about really a responsibility to make to grow awareness of these policy mechanisms, for government to figure out how to make them more accessible by drawing input from the private sector. And I think we as academics have a role to play. We're doing the research on these policies. We're not particularly good at putting that out in ways that are accessible for people. And I think that the academic sector also has a role to play in making people aware.
If I can add to that, so working at Good Things Guy and telling these stories about businesses that have CSR projects, you're 100% correct. They do care, especially coming out of the pandemic. You speak about purpose. You spoke about purpose-driven business. It is purpose-driven and passion, and they care for sustainability. Doing good is good for business, and it really does show. And when we assist other South Africans in rising, we all rise together. It's that helpfulness to create a better economy for all of us. And we see it all the time in the businesses that we profile.
And I think that's important in amplifying that kind of messaging and understanding, because that might even enhance the levels of collaborative approaches that can be adopted to say, hold on, what did you do, Dr. Janchis, at your organization? What did you do, Carmel, within your institution? How can we get Digital Frontiers to actually assist us in terms of adopting these particular approaches? I do want to remind you that for those of you who might have questions in the room, please do be mindful of perhaps raising your hand at some point, and a roving mic will come to you. We'll keep it to 2 to 3 questions, just to ensure that we do keep it concise in the room. And those of you online, keep using the chat service and facility. I'm shifting gears again because we have discussed the policy's impact, so we understand that some of the tools are there. Some may be a bit rusted, but others still capable of actually tightening up or loosening the screws that we actually need to implement as well as adopt. But I do think it's pertinent that we also shine a light on what it is that business has been doing. One of the questions that came through on the chat facility earlier was asking, what can business do to stop South Africa from becoming a failed state? And it's a heavy question. Business leaders are looking at me and nodding their heads to say, oh boy, it falls on our lap again. And the truth is, it's a significant challenge. And perhaps Dr. Janchis, as well as yourself, Carmel, this is where you can also share some of your insight. Nazreen, feel free to jump in, primarily highlighting some of the, opportunities that you've tapped into as business leaders, and primarily focusing, again, on sustainability, using the tools that are present, but going even a mile further, I guess, to ensure that we do see that shift in the needle when it comes to GDP contribution and jobs creation.
Great. Thanks, Gugu. As they were talking, I was just reflecting on the latest Gartner report that looks at a survey that is done of CEOs and what's top of their mind. And social impact and sustainability is keeping CEOs awake.
That's refreshing.
Which is quite important. And I think this is it's a global outlook. It's not just unique to South Africa. It's a global outlook on what is key in ensuring that there's a good relationship between people, planet, and business. I think for us, I think that the question is so important. We've invested quite a lot in the SMME sector. So in 2015, we carved out a unit which is called Telkom Future Makers. And to date, we've invested in over 2,600 SMMEs. Now, our impact in those SMMEs would not have been possible without partnerships again. So we partner with skills development organizations, as she was talking about policies that relate to SMMEs. We partner with organizations that help them with back-end office support as well, and as well funding. APSA is also one of our partners within that. So it is through that partnership and investment in SMMEs, as I think Dr. Padilo Hotla alluded to the key role of SMMEs as the potential backbone of South African economy. We've carved out Future Makers to break down the barrier of how we talk to SMMEs and how SMMEs talk to us. Corporates, we can be very bureaucratic, large bureaucratic, making it difficult for us to be accessible. And so we carved out this particular function to say, bring corporates closer to us, but bring other partners who allow us to scale our impact in growing SMMEs. I'm proud to say that we were some of the first funders of what you now know as Sweep South. We were some of the earliest funders, and it was through organizations such as Future Makers, which brought us much more closer to the SMMEs, which are growing the economy, which have a very strong social impact, which are in areas where we cannot be as a corporate, but are able to create jobs and put food on the table for South Africans.
I'm keen to also understand how you implement a policy to monitor, measure, and of course ensure that sustainability is also achieved here, right? Especially after the 5 years of growth of SMMEs.
I think she spoke about policies that help towards this. This policy is related to ESD and our contribution on that. But I think purpose-driven, purpose-led. We then had representatives across the business who work very closely with these particular agents who are in essence the voice of SMMEs in the business, even at EXCO level, representing SMMEs' interests within the business. So being purpose-led was not just carving out a function, but saying at every intersection points of the business, how do we make sure that someone is speaking on behalf of SMMEs to go, as much as we have this market, where's our SMMEs playing a role within this? So we report that, but I think beyond the reporting, we're quite purpose-led about that.
100%. Kamal, let's hear your insight here, building up again on the theme of what business can do to ensure that we don't become a failed state. And you've also mentioned initiatives not only in Ghana, but I also understand that there's a group society investment where 1.5 billion rand was actually invested in a stream of entrepreneurs. Give us some insight there and perhaps some lessons and learnings that we can also take out here.
Sure. So I think from when we apply the South Africa lens to the ESG story within ABSA, it's very much centered around financial inclusion. And when we talk about financial inclusion, it's about creating intergenerational wealth across all spectrums of the economy and our partners. And when we look at where the biggest impact can be felt, it is indeed within the SME segment. The SME segment creates the opportunity for job creation, which is integral from an economic development perspective for the country. It creates, SMEs are exceptionally entrepreneurial. It again brings that diversity to economic development that is so much needed in the country. So when we look at financial inclusion in South Africa, some of the projects that have been exceptionally successful for us is around Ready to Work. Ready to Work is a platform that we've created that brings together youth and job investors, job seekers, and tries to bridge that gap between tertiary education and actually getting that job experience. So the platform creates opportunities for job seekers to meet with potential recruiters. It provides world-class learning platforms to become job ready as you enter the market. When we look at the success of the Ready to Work platform, just in 2022, we were able to support and develop over 30,000 job seekers on the platform. And, previous years also, double-digit impact across the market. But overlaying that is, again, my panelists spoke about it, it's collaboration and partnership. It is integral for us as private sector to scale the impact that we're having in the space when it comes to skills development. And from an ABSA perspective, where we have found good and opportunity to scale our impact is the partnerships that we have with NGOs, the partnerships that we have with charities, the partnerships that we have with other development institutions. We work quite closely with the IFC in this regard. And what we found is that SMEs require funding. They require capacity building within their internal environment. And by overlaying what we bring as an institution through financial inclusion with the capacity building skills of some of our global partners, we're able to go into the SME environment and create that opportunity for them to build scale in South Africa and then across the rest of the continent.
100%. Capitalizing on the policy that exists in the market, addressing the particular need that might be unique to the organization that you're with, and of course making sure that there's scalability on that particular end. I do want us to shift gears because in a moment I want us to talk further about skills development and the business role and impact here, especially leveraging off of technology. Because in a country like South Africa, when we mention digital transformation, artificial intelligence, we know that it causes a sense of panic, especially because it's viewed as a threat to employment in a country like ours. But I do want us to take a few questions from the floor. So if there are any questions, your hand has been noted, sir. Your hand has also been noted, sir. So if the roving mic can get to the two of you quite promptly, please keep your hands up high to make it easy for my colleagues to identify you, and we'll be able to address your questions. We will take you, sir. You had a hand up, sir, if I'm not mistaken, behind you. There was a hand at the back and over here too. If you can keep your questions short, precise, no opinions, just questions, please, sir.
Okay. Mine was an opinion, so.
We'll save it for later. We're only doing this just in the interest of time to ensure that our panelists have something to respond to. Sir, you can go ahead with your question, Mpho, and your hand has been noted, sir. We'll take a few from online as well. Go ahead, sir.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mpho Matsitse at BCX. So mine is to ABSA, right? The model you're talking about is the virtual labor market, which is a concept that was explored by City of Johannesburg about a couple of years ago. I guess they never got it right, but you got it right. What I'm concerned about is you're talking about 30,000 people that you sort of help from a skills perspective. How many new jobs did you create? That's question number one. Question number two, quickly Google, is you're running an enterprise supplier development program, but the guys need more than funding, right? The challenge that you're having at the moment is that you've got guys that you're giving loans, but they're not able to scale and grow. They need more from you than just the normal funding. So what are you doing from a consultative approach to drive an advisory leg that is built on top of the funding that is non-negotiable to get them to scale? Because if they don't scale, they don't create jobs. Right?
100%. Thank you so much for that question, Paul. We'll take your response, Kamal, and your hand, sir, has been noted. We'll come to you briefly.
Thank you for the question. I will start with the second question. I think that our policy as a bank is to look at the long-term sustainability of the client. So when we're going into funding, especially within an SME environment, capacity building and skills development is part of the structure that we will offer clients. Again, I spoke about the partnerships that we have with a lot of the entities within global development, so the IFC, we work with MasterCard Foundation in Ghana, but these are the partners that come in to capacitate and provide that skills development. We're a very big player in the agribusiness in South Africa, and within the agri sector, one of the focuses that we have right now is looking at inclusive supply chains. So whilst we're working with the cooperatives, how are we capacitating the bottom end of that supply chain? And a lot of investment is going into that skills development and capacity building within the agri sector. With regards to job creation around the Ready to Work program, by last estimates, we had within the 2022 financial year seen approximately 1,600 new jobs created through the program in South Africa.
Are these sustainable jobs for the long term? In other words, full-term employment or job creation opportunities that exist?
Job creation opportunities. So connecting the job seekers with the recruiters, connecting the job seekers with corporate clients in the market.
Got you. I hope that answers your question, sir. So you can go ahead with your question. You've already got the microphone.
On.
Loud and clear.
Thank you so much. My name is Rudy Peterson. I'm proudly from UJ with my colleague, Prof. Graham there. So Gugu, you're steering the ship very well. I had a comment. I quickly parked that comment and went to question.
For a question.
So my question is really for our former SG, and not SG and Secretary General of Political Movement, but our former Statistician General. So could it be that, Dr. Leotla, you're not wearing that suit anymore, given the doom and gloom in South Africa today, that you have perhaps left the suit out? The next one, what role currently do you play in advising government? And the important tale that you've said is doom and gloom, but it's what we need to know. So I just wanted to check, given your tenure as the Statistician General, I'm sure you've made recommendations to government before. Are you telling us that government over the years did not listen? Thank you.
Valid question. Thank you so much. Dr. Lehotla, we're going to take an opportunity to put you on the spot here. And I'm hoping that you're comfortable to address the question. If you could, the microphone is just making its way to you. From there, we'll come to some of the questions that have come through on the chat service regarding NGOs, skills development, as well as in ESG.
How many days do you have?
Oh, for you, just 2 minutes.
Why I ended up where I am with Economic Modeling Academy was because the uptake in government was completely impossible. I talked to the DGs and said, colleagues, These back of the envelope calculations called plans are not plans. We need sophisticated tools of foresight. I went and researched. The CGE model, Quantec, and all those were not meeting the requirements. The head of research, Dr. Murudu, in my office, he's an economist. I said, go and research and find where we can look at tools of foresight that are credible. I came across ADRS. Obviously, ADRS consults. The issue is the bureaucrats must have the capacity to do this work. I thought I would locate at UJ. And Professor Marwala said, yes, come. We tried to start that center at UJ. But when this thing got to the professors and heads of departments, so we had to go and establish it outside. And we have just located now at Gibbs. And we need people to come and take power. Bureaucrats must take power and stop consulting when it's not necessary. And that's our story. So asking whether government uses the data, they have elbows in their ears and thumbs in their eyes. That's how I can explain. Because I've made this presentation several times to them. But when they don't have tools of planning, it's difficult to absorb the meaning. Thank you.
They say straight talk breaks no friendship. Appreciate that, Dr. Lehotla. I do want to come to two questions that we have received from our viewers who are joining us online, and one is particularly linked to education as well as learning. Nazran, I think we'll address this one to you just in terms of the work that you do within your organization. And this one asks, thinking of education/learning as an ongoing process applicable to both leaders in authority positions and those in the school systems in South Africa, what role can education play to influence the situation positively and turn things around for the benefit of all? Loaded.
Yeah, so the role of education in South Africa is significant, but incorporating digital skills and ensuring that we are on the forefront of what the world is doing is important in our education. And so having an adaptable and agile curriculum is important to ensure that this curriculum changes over time.
Do you say we have that in South Africa right now?
No, we don't.
So for the parents who might be listening, the leaders of NGOs, the leaders of business, what should we be encouraging our current workforce and even parents within the workforce to prioritize when it comes to education and perhaps skills training? Digital skills, I'm assuming?
Yes, digital skills and within the digital economy, but recognizing prior working skills as well, and the competencies within the digital economy is important within the education system.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And perhaps we can build up on this, particularly focused on Telkom, right? We're well aware that you've highlighted a few aspects that do speak to the amplification of digital skills, the participation in the digital economy. But let's be honest, when we talk anything to do with tech, it's viewed as a threat to job creation and employment in South Africa as our labor force remains on the back end. How is it that perhaps we can use existing policies, existing tools, and technology companies like your own and many other collaborators to enhance participation in the digital economy here? Are there learnings you can share?
Indeed. I think the sustainability or ensuring a sustainable workforce for any company is quite important. Several years also before I joined Telkom, there was a futuristic thinking of the potential of artificial intelligence to have an impact on us. And an academy was then funded and had a long-term partnership with us as Telkom to grow a skill set which was not there, which is data sciences. Today, when we woke up and talk about AI and its potential impact across sectors, we were ready because we, several years back, invested in that capability, which now actually sits at BCX. We invested in that capability to ensure that we'll be at the forefront of how artificial intelligence and our role within society will play. And so those partnerships, once again, are quite important in having a futuristic view for sustainability for business as well, to ensure that we are able to impact our clients and society that we work in.
Mm-hmm. What are the risks, though, if business focuses primarily in the metropolitan areas where there's exposure? Is there a concerted effort to make sure that we bridge that divide, as we're well aware that inequality in the country is quite rife, depending on which side of the M1 highway you look at?
Completely. Clients are not only in metropolitans. When we do business, business is across South Africa. I probably have not done justice to also talk about our foundation, which does work across the country, has specific interventions in primary education. So Telkom has interventions in basic education, in higher education, and skills also coming into the company as a group. So we're quite deliberate about that. And so we've had a lot of interventions that are actually scaled. And I think the pandemic showed us that we can have programs that intervene across the country. Another one which I'll do injustice if I don't talk about, is a township incubator, which we started in Soweto, which was geared towards SMMEs in townships. We've scaled that because we've seen during the pandemic that we can send them business in a box, which essentially allows them to be online with data that is supported by us and gain all the skills that they need as SMMEs. So we need to be deliberate and intentional about reaching the far-flung areas because our customers are sitting in every aspect of South Africa.
100%. We've got a minute before we do have to wrap up this conversation and take a slight breather before we engage in the next conversation. However, I'll try and stretch it by maybe 90 seconds over, because I'd like to get your closing remarks and comments on a number of themes that have been highlighted. One thing is quite clear, that when we talk sustainability, yes, it cuts across many particular areas, CSI, shared value, and of course taking a look at ESG, but there needs to be a common understanding as to how we use the tools, the policies that are in place in order to leverage the opportunities that might exist within our separate silos, be it academia, be it in sharing that messaging, or leveraging financial services and technology within those particular spaces. We've touched on policies, we spoke about people, and we discussed purpose. But I want us to walk away here with a key objective that many of us here in the room and those watching online can actually hold ourselves accountable to. Brent, we saw a comment that also came through on the chat service saying you've highlighted how NGOs continue to create job opportunities.
Yeah.
Government is failing. What more can we do to support NGOs? So your word of support, recommendation that we can share with the participants today.
So NGOs are the backbone of our country. They are looking after South Africans at grassroots level, whether it's skills, education, food, whatever it is. NGOs are doing the most for South Africans. As businessmen, as business people and business owners, it is our responsibility to enable them to continue doing the good work they do. How do we do that? Money, first of all. Secondly, time. Time is a huge thing that you can give. It's a valuable asset that you can give. If you have skills that you can give an NGO, you'll be helping them continue to do the good work that they do as well.
100%. Professor Graham, we heard the sentiment that it will be impossible to close the skills gap in South Africa. You obviously have a very different view. How do we take advantage of the opportunity that exists and can implement within our organizations? 20 seconds.
I think when we're talking about social impact in relation to skills development, we have to be talking about scaling wide. And so that means these amazing examples that we've heard, how do we replicate that across different private and civil society organizations, and scaling up. Scaling up means business has a voice around policy making. How do we, as business people, engage with policy making so that we're able to leverage the existing policies and shift policy to be more effective in skills development?
100%. Dr. Jantjies, I'm going to come to you and personalize this slightly, because you've had the pleasure of being an entrepreneur, working for NGOs, and now working for a leading corporate in South Africa. All of these players participate in a different part of the cycle that we need to participate in and be deliberate about. I'm keen to get your closing comments for the entrepreneur, for the NGO players, as well as the corporate. What's the one thing that each of these players needs to do?
I think the one thing that is important for us as a country is understand that we can't reach impact and scale without partnership. And whether we do this through policy, whether we do this through interventions which are purpose-led, we need to be authentic, we need to be purpose-driven about ensuring those partnerships. For us to go far, we need to go together and not individually.
Nazrana, maybe we can get your thoughts. You focus across the globe on other emerging markets, but South Africa does have its unique challenges. What can we learn from our international peers that is easy to implement in our local environment?
I think collaboration with international partners, and an example is the World Bank. And the World Bank has a program called Digital Skills for Africa. And we can leverage off that regarding our technology, funding opportunities, resources, etc. And so it's important that we not only collaborate with international partners, but also industry players that show significant growth within our economy.
Palmer, we'll close it off with you again, representing business, which is criticized again for not focusing enough on the S. How do we shift that narrative internally in organizations, but also for fellow stakeholders to understand that sustainability remains key and important to business?
I think it's a culture shift within the organization, and it needs to be driven from the top of the house down. The actions within private sector in terms of building that capacity and leveraging the strengths that they have needs to be intentional. And working with partners, working with like-minded individuals, working with NGOs, working with the global players that have been successful in this place is integral to success. So we need to partner.
Definitely. Partnerships, policy, people, sustainability are some of the key outputs that we've heard here today. I've taken up the 90 seconds to 2 minutes, but we'll wrap it up there. If you do have any further feedback or comments or would like to interact with many of our panelists, please do feel free to do so, especially those of you who are present here in the room. But most importantly, walk away from this conversation having envisaged a manner, a method, a tool that can be implemented within your own organization to drive sustainability with a social focus within the companies that you lead. Thank you very much to my panelists for joining us for this conversation. Thank you for those of you who have been able to ask questions online as well as in the room. We're going to take a quick 15-minute comfort break. We'll keep it to 15 minutes. And when we do return, we will have a very energizing conversation, primarily focusing on the electricity and power concerns that we have in South Africa. That conversation will be moderated by Alicia Sekam. But we'll see you in 15 minutes. Please give my panelists a round of applause. welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, especially to those of you who are joining us back on our virtual platform. Good to have you join us for what will be a rather invigorating conversation. Those of you who are present in the room as well, thanks for coming back and settling in. And a gentle reminder that we've obviously started off the day with, significant insights that have been shared, right? But most importantly, what we look to build up on when it comes to these conversations are positive outcomes that we can build up on. Now, our next panel discussion is going to source some solutions to a rather tricky challenge that we've been experiencing in South Africa. If I say stage 3, stage 6, or even stage 8, you don't need to guess what it is that I'm talking about. We're well aware of load shedding as well as the electricity crisis that we have in our country. So this next conversation will certainly take a look at how best we can energize South Africa's economy. It will be moderated by a well-respected, seasoned financial journalist and broadcaster, Alicia Seckham, who will introduce her panelists as well as take us through the conversation.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Gugu, and certainly a big challenge that's been given to the three of us sitting here today. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining in on this conversation, which is a critical one to growing the South African economy, right? Under an hour, not nearly enough time to get full grip of the dynamics shaping the reality of South Africa's energy crisis. So I'm certainly not going to labor much the status quo. We are all well aware of where things are at. The Minister of Electricity, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, unfortunately unable to join the conversation this morning as planned to answer some of the pertinent questions on everybody's minds. We're also missing the small business voice of John Dludlu this morning, but I do have an esteemed panel of guests with me this morning nevertheless. And what we're going to try and do is, as Gugu said, unpack some of the possible solutions around how we can rebuild the epicenters of crumbling infrastructure and the crisis we face as a South African economy. We're looking at ways to rewire the national grid so that we can be more productive, so that we can see this economy grow, and so that we can see a sustainable economic future ahead. Because that's what the directors' event is all about, right? It's about working to distill a clear-cut view on the one hand, but then also driving towards very clear resolutions to enforce a certain agenda. So how do we get to a South Africa re-energized? Joining me with their perspectives this morning, I've got Jacob Marocha, who's Director of Aeronite Energy and former CEO of Eskom as well. Busisiwe Mavuso, who's CEO of Business Leadership South Africa, and Stephen Kaplan, who's current president of the South African Institution for Civil Engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want this conversation to be as interactive as possible, so I encourage you to be a part of it as you have been up to this point. You can pop any questions you might have for our panelists into the chat box online this morning, and I will pose them on your behalf. So, we're in a crisis. We need to be engaging constructively. We need to be putting talk to action. 45 minutes, no time for mudslinging. We're here to talk solutions. We want to look forward. What are the challenges that need to be addressed urgently? And how we can viably turn the situation we're in around. Lucy, I'm going to start off with you. The minister may not be here, but I want to comment on his appointment. In your books, do you feel that we have a minister with a clear mandate and enough power to execute on it?
This is precisely why the minister is not here. I think I should have. So I think when he was appointed, it was clear to me and clear to most that you are including yet another ministry in what is already a complex situation. You know, Eskom reports, if I'm not mistaken, to 7 ministries. It's DFFE, it's National Treasury, it's DPE, it's DMRE, you've included electricity, the list goes on, you know, and Remarocha will know this quite well. So what the executives end up doing, it's a lot of reporting, duplicating, you know, the work that they continue or the reports that they've actually done for one ministry to the next and whatever the case is. And you have to ask the question, where do they actually find the time to do what needs to be done? I think the president has actually attempted to try and clear his mandate. It's not quite there yet. I understand he still needs to ask for permission to go to power stations from Pravin Gordhan, which doesn't make sense. I wonder where the IRP sits at the moment, Alicia, right? We are supposed to develop a new IRP, which is supposed to set the path for what the right optimal energy mix is supposed to be for South Africa. I know Gwede is talking about nuclear. He is talking about extending the life of the current existing power stations. They're talking about power ships. I look at it and I say, from which plan are we making these decisions? Because the IRP is also very clear that you need to take the least cost route. Now, if you're talking about nuclear and you're talking about power ships, is that the least cost route? Isn't renewable energy what we actually should be focusing on? And there is that confusion. There isn't alignment between the ministries. Certainly on the power ships, Gwede said one thing and the Minister of Environmental Affairs said one thing. So it is a confusion. There isn't a clear mandate. There isn't a plan. So what is really guiding our directions in terms of where we are supposed or how we're supposed to plug the 6 gigawatt gap that is supposed to end load shedding?
And I say, right at the top of this conversation, Busi, you place me in a position of comfort because over the past 2 weeks, I've been following news headlines and I've been struggling to make head or tails of what's viable and what's not at this point. And interesting that you say, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Attempted to try is actually the kind of wording that you used there. Stephen, I'm going to bring it to you and give you a moment there. Politics aside.
Can I take it further from what
Before you do.
Yes, okay.
Before you do. Because we know the political web is a very intricate one. It is one that we can spend more than a day unpacking. I want to move this to taking stock of where we're at, because you've had SAICI publish its 4th infrastructure report card addressing the current condition of South Africa's infrastructure, and that including the energy sector. What were the persistent factors identified on that end that have led to the deterioration we've seen up to this point?
Okay, so SAICI, the South African Institution of Civil Engineering, has published 4 infrastructure report cards now, starting from 2006 right up to 2022. So we can see the trends of all of the sectors, and we look at all of the sectors, including the energy sector. And really what's happened now is that South Africa has received the lowest rating ever since 2006. We're at a D, which is at risk of failure. So, I mean, that's not a good situation at all. But having said that too, the economic infrastructure, the bulk transport and the bulk communications and the bulk energy, except for Eskom as such, remain in a reasonably satisfactory condition. But actually the social infrastructure is where the problems are, like the drinking water, the sanitation, the hospitals, the schools, and the public transport. You look at what's going on in Hammanskraal right now, that's a typical example where social infrastructure has failed. In other words, it's gone from a D to an E, which means it's no longer fit for purpose, and it's failed. Okay, so the most persistent problems that we've been picking up on really are the underfunded public service institutions that lack appropriate technical decision-making skills. And this has led to the backlog of planned new infrastructure and the maintenance of the existing infrastructure. And also there's a complete absence of efficient regulatory and policy frameworks. There's no accountability within the public service institution. So that's a persistent problem that's been going on right since 2006, getting worse and worse and worse. The other issues are poor end user behavior. And that's where it comes down to the community through the theft of material and vandalism. I mean, obviously, I understand the public are unhappy and that they're protesting, but vandalism and theft, all it does is destroy already struggling infrastructure. And then there's an increasing community culture of non-payment for services, where they won't pay for the water and they won't pay for the electricity, which means that it's harder to attract the revenue, make bankable projects, look at PPPs, things like that if you haven't got revenue coming in. But it's a two-edged sword. Having said that the community won't pay for water, You're asking a community member in Hammanskraal to walk 5 kilometers with his bucket to get the water, and it's full of cholera. So, what do you want me to pay for? I mean, really? I mean, in all fairness, you're asking me to pay for electricity, but it's off half the day. And you want me to pay for it? I mean, no, really. And there are obviously other external factors like COVID and things like, climate change that, even the state can't control entirely.
But you have highlighted the top persistent factors that plague, right?
Those are the top persistent factors. And obviously, we're all aware of what remedial actions need to be put in place to actually address those things.
Before we get there, Jacob, is this all news to you? And I ask this, no, but bear with me, I do ask it, slightly tongue-in-cheek here, right? Because this has all been well known for the longest while, and yet there has been a lack of, there's been ineffective action to prevent the decay. So what are the constraints that are preventing the tackling of these persistent factors?
Yeah, look, before we go into the technical problems, because we can name them, funding, my view is that the biggest problem that connects all of these problems, I think, is lack of industrial vision, right? In that, when you look at the energy system, South African energy system, was built on a mining industrial vision, right? For the past 100 years, the energy system sustained a world-class, well-competitive mining industry that made this country. So the next issue for us, post-1994, what is then our next industrial vision, and how do we organize an energy system and other infrastructure systems around it? So in the absence of that, we're going to be fighting about whether it's renewable, whether it's coal, whether it's nuclear. And I can talk about the example of China, if I may. We're talking about energy, renewable energy. 20 years ago, they made it in the energy sector a vision to be the cheapest provider of renewable energy in the world. We are buying 90% of every renewable equipment comes out of China. Because 20 years ago, they went around and said, what does it make for us to be the top of the world in solar PV? And they looked at the entire supply chain and they dominated it. And the irony of it, using coal is part of the equation.
But what you've pointed to there, Jacob, is a planning, that there's a plan that's necessary. And in that context, my question to the minister this morning was going to be, what's the plan? I mean, he's been quite frank in saying that we aren't going to see the end of load shedding come December. It's not feasible, but that we do have an energy action plan in play that is going to see a considerable decrease in terms of the amount of load shedding we're going to be seeing by then. Busi is not convinced. Are you convinced that we have a robust enough plan in place even to hit the more modest target that the ministers put on the table?
There are certain parts of the plan which are feasible. For me, the only credible plan in terms of ending load shedding is fixing the ESCOM plants.
Absolutely.
The problem is that there is a technical contestation about what the problem is. Unless that contestation is resolved by engineers, we're going to be fluffing around. Because the problem is that we don't have enough capacity. We've got more than enough capacity in South Africa. When I was at ESCOM, our highest demand was about 34,000 megawatts. We have not reached 34,000 megawatts since 2010. We are actually, our demand maybe 32, 33. But we have added 10,000 of Medupi and Kusile. We have added 6,000 of renewables. So there is enough capacity in the system. The problem is the performance of the capacity, and mainly is the performance of the coal capacity. You solve that, we won't have to talk about load shedding. Now, how long does it take? We can talk about it. But as long as this contestation, and it's a major contestation, and I want to say this, that for the past 3 years, I think the reason the coal fleet deteriorated is because important people actually believed that there's an instant solution in renewables, and they neglected the coal base.
Okay, Lucy.
Alicia, I partly agree with Remaroja in that when we're talking about fixing ESCOM, what does that mean? Because I'm yet to see a credible plan of what fixing ESCOM means.
Yeah.
Because fixing ESCOM means, to a large extent, political will, Remaroja, which is not there. Political contestation. The foundation on which ESCOM is sitting is rotten. The reason why 19 years later we haven't finished Midupi and Kusile, it's because of the prevalent crime and corruption.
Yeah.
So is ESCOM supposed to continue to be central to the equation, or supposed to be talking about broadly energy? Is ESCOM, can we salvage ESCOM, at least with this current political climate? Because then that's just the thing. There is a lot, if you're talking about R1 billion per month leaking from the system. Yeah. Where do you even begin fixing ESCOM in that environment?
Lucky for us, we've got an engineer.
I think...
So, Jacob has said that the plan isn't deep enough. We've had years of underinvestment. We've had looting. We've had lack of maintenance, Stephen, everything. Are we underestimating what it's actually going to take to turn things around from an infrastructure perspective on the one hand, but on the other side of the coin, is there enough of a focus on capacitation and competence to drive a sustainable agenda?
That's exactly it. And I listened to Minister Ramagopa's update on his plan on the 2nd of June. And he said that by the 5th of June, which is a date that's come and passed, using these resource mobilization funds, they were going to put senior engineers into 4 power stations and to start doing an analysis on the reason why the energy availability factor on those 4 power stations is below what it should be. And he actually started quoting percentages on Matla, Majuba, Kendall, and Creel, that, through an analysis of what was going on in those power stations, they would implement whatever is required to clean the filters, clean the cooling towers, whatever, improve the quality of the coal coming in, make whatever the necessary repairs in. And he was talking about getting, 1,500 megawatts right there. They were talking about buying another 1,000 megawatts from Mozambique. They're talking about short-term risk mitigation, independent power program, 2 hybrid projects, which are going to be ready by the end of June, apparently, with another 274 megawatts. So he did lay out a plan, but it all comes down to capacitation. Why didn't they do this years ago? If it's a case of actually putting experienced people into the power stations to understand why their energy availability factor is low and dealing with that, doing the repairs, doing the maintenance, this could have happened a long time ago. And this is what frustrates me, is that lack of capacity, well, it's actually a lack of appreciation of the need of engineers in the decision-making and maintenance issues and renewal issues. And once you've actually acknowledged that you need engineers to do that, actually doing it, putting them in place. I would like to know, 5th of June has come and gone. Are these engineers using this mobilization fund, are they in place?
Yeah.
Are they there now?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
I'd like to know that
one of us would like to know.
and are they doing the work? And having done the work, in other words, these guys, these engineers are going to come up with a nice report saying, this is what we've got to spend 20 million on Matla, 50 million on Majuba, and et cetera, et cetera. Now it's got to go through a whole procurement process. They're not going to just say, right, okay, let's just fix that now. Now there's going to be a 6 month to a year procurement process going through National Treasury, going through God knows what else with complicated procedures, and then what?
Yes, we need engineers. This is not about capacity. I think Remaroja has just said just now, you've got engineers galore, you've got skills galore, you've got capacity galore. The problem is that you are put in that environment as an engineer, as the board, as the CEO, with both your arms tied behind your back, and you are expected to box in a boxing ring. How the hell are you going to do that? The decisions of ESCOM are made at Luthuli House. That is what the problem is. ESCOM knows what needs to be done. There's plans galore that have been put in place. Talk to Chris Yelland, talk to Anton Eberhard, talk to ESCOM executives who will tell you and give you the diagnosis of what is wrong at ESCOM. Yeah. Ask me where those plans are sitting. I also don't know where they are sitting, because someone who has got absolutely no clue about what's going on at ESCOM is making decisions about what should happen at ESCOM. That is what the problem is. We can fix this thing. You just need political will. You need political will, and you need to be able to make tough decisions. This is a leadership. We're sitting with a leadership crisis. We're sitting.
You know, I sit here and I listen to you, and ladies and gentlemen, this is angry South Africa personified, right? This is what we're all feeling. And so, Jacob, where my next question to you was going to be, what kind of investments are you proposing be made? I don't even know if that's a valid one, because who's going to make the investment into this leaking bucket?
Look, I don't want to be, to give up, to say, you know, it's all...
No, we're re-energizing South Africa here.
Can't give up. Yeah.
And I think to Vusi's point about the question, should we still trust in ESCOM? My answer to that, we've got no choice.
We don't.
It's like when you've got a public service, you can't go and have an alternative public service, right? So if there are issues that ESCOM, we're going to have to solve them, because currently the alternative that say you can set up a parallel energy system in the next 15 to 20 years is, with respect, I think, misdirected. We have the plans we have. We have almost the 10th largest power system in the world, and it's centered around ESCOM. There is no way, you don't have the money to actually just say, let's abandon it and start something else.
Okay, so then perhaps I can ask you, where do the investments need to be made right now?
So firstly, the attitude should be, whatever it takes, we need to fix what we have. That's the first attitude. The second attitude is, what are the things? For instance, I think when you make a general statement about ESCOM, you miss the point that there are many power stations in ESCOM that are operating at world class. Letabo, Matimba, and to some extent Midupi. And part of the reason why they operate at that level is that their coal supply is very secure. Those stations have got local power coal supply, dedicated coal. The rest has got part coal supply. And when you talk about fixing ESCOM, you need to look at the total coal ecosystem. You see, if we quit coal too early and in a chaotic way, the coal supply could actually disinvest. You can have a coal power stations, but no coal supply because the coal suppliers have disinvested. So we need to look at the coal ecosystem and make sure that we secure it as long as we need while we do the transition. The transition is not instant. Countries that have done the transition, Germany, Australia, have taken almost 20 years, but they are not still halfway in the transition. So we need to be very frank in terms of this notion that you could instantly transition to a new system, particularly a system based on weather-dependent sources. So we have what we have. We need to deal with the things that we need to deal with within ESCOM, and I don't believe from where I'm sitting and from what I know that it can all set to be rotten to an extent that it cannot be salvageable. There are 40,000 people in ESCOM. There are probably 100,000 in the coal industry supporting ESCOM, OEMs, and other suppliers. You can't chuck that ecosystem away and put a new ecosystem instantly. So for me, therefore, the attitude should be, we need to do what it takes. We need to put the leadership that is able and empowered, and I agree with you. Government must stop thinking that state ownership is state management, right? Shareholding is not management. There are state-owned companies all over the world, Emirates, that run world-class operations because their owners understand state management is different from state ownership. State ownership is you put people you trust in those positions and you get out of the way. That's the way that we can actually salvage our situation.
So, Vusi, until that then comes to the fore, because we know what needs to be plugged, right, before any investment can be made, what level of engagement or capital commitment are we likely to see from big business?
You know, from where you're sitting, I think you've seen the RMB Business Confidence Index 2 days ago. You know, for the 5th consecutive quarter, that those numbers from a confidence perspective have gone down. I think at the moment they are sitting at 27%. They were at 36% a quarter ago. So having only 25% thereabout of businesses believing in the system is a problem. It is a problem because it means if there is no confidence, there is not going to be investment. And I think if there's not going to be investment, we are not going to be able to see the levels of economic growth that we'd like to see. I think the problem with South Africa is that we tend to think that we are a special case. And I think we are very insular in our thinking. You know, we forget that we are part of a global market. We forget that the drive that we have for investment, you have many other emerging economies who are actually rolling out the red carpet for capital, you know, and they're actually giving us a run for our money. You know, you are currently seeing investment and interest shifting from South Africa to East Africa because of the deteriorating trading environment while we sit and quibble about Eskom the way we're quibbling about Eskom right now. You know, investors are not going to sit. You know, capital is like water. It always follows the path of least resistance. So if you're going to make it difficult for capital to land here, capital has got many addresses. And unfortunately, at the moment, the South African address does not look very attractive because the risk metrics, in spite of the many opportunities that we have as a country, the risk metrics for the country, you know, is moving more to the red zone if you're looking at the risk heat map of South Africa. When you look at the WEF Global Risks Report, they will tell you that we are now in the top 31 countries who are at the high risk for a failing state, for infrastructure collapse, for social erosion, for a whole lot of this debt crisis. And I think those indices matter because then when we're looking for foreign direct investment, they look at those issues. When you take the posture that you have just taken on Russia, it concerns capital. It concerns capital because you can't do as you please. You can't choose to disregard international commitments and international treaties. When you go against the commitments that you have made, when you were given the $8.5 billion to drive the Just Energy Transition Program, you know, and you deviate from those plans, it erodes confidence. Yeah. And that is the environment that we're actually sitting in at the moment. So capital is very worried. The reason why we have come together and we have said with the president to say, let's just look at three things. What are the top three things? What does the 80-20 look like for South Africa? What are the 20% of the things that if we were to fix, it will shift 80% of the sentiment? And that is how we came up with energy, crime and corruption and transport and logistics. So we have to get down to business and fix these things. You know, otherwise capital and investors are moving on.
Is government listening?
Look, we've got plans in place. We've had the conversation. The president has given his team and has given the ministers a very clear directive, you know, in terms of where or how we actually should be working together. I think let's see what happens. You know, Stephen has just spoken about engineers that are actually going to be put in the 4 power stations. We have set up 100 million rands fund to fund capacity of NICOM, you know, to ensure that the energy plan that we have as a country is actually implemented. Let's see, you know, that the resources that we put into these systems are going to be given the space to do what they need to do. Then I guess I can probably maybe answer the question as to whether government is...
So let's, Stephen, move beyond that then, right? Because it boils down to proper project management. And it's been said on this panel now that it's a fraught ecosystem. We're looking at complex multi-projects that are coming into play, surely we need this relook more aggressively at how things are being done so that we don't end up with another Kusile, so that we don't end up with another Medupi. I mean, Kusile started when? 2008, right? So what's the plan and what are you advising in terms of how we practically start relooking the agenda?
I think the issue to take it further as well is that these large projects need public participation, the PPPs. Yeah. And, for any international funding organization to get involved in a PPP, it has to be a bankable project. And that's exactly what you're saying. And honestly, if you haven't got a culture of payment for services, and you haven't got that sort of security, an economic security in the country in place, no investor is going to get involved in a PPP if it isn't even a bankable project, and they aren't bankable projects. So we've got to get to a position where if you're going to identify a project, a new power station or even repairs to an existing power station, and you want to do it with a public-private participation, it has to be bankable. There's got to be the confidence in that investor to want to be part of that program so that they know that whatever they're investing, they'll get a return on that investment. And at the moment, that is not available. That's not seen, and it's not attractive at all. So, we have to start, just as you said, start to correct what we've got. I think, there's no doubt about it. We can't just wash Eskom aside. We have to fix these power stations. We've got to get the energy availability factor up in all of the power stations, not just the few that are working properly. Deal with the short-term power issues, purchasing power from international sources if necessary. Ramagopa spoke about 2 windows of opportunity. The first window being wind and solar, and 5,000 megawatts, and then later on battery storage and gas projects, another 4,500. All of these things need to be implemented, but I don't think Eskom has the know-how or the capacity to do it on its own. It needs the commitment of an engineering expertise and decision-making process to assist in those decisions, to make sure that the projects that are compiled and put together as PPPs, because I think we need a bit of public funding and private funding, they've got to be bankable. So we've got to actually turn that thing around. We have to change the attractiveness of South Africa with foreign investment, exactly as you were saying.
So a segue into what I was going to go into next, Jacob, because I want to take this into another quarter. We're talking incentives being put on the table in order for PPPs to make more sense than they have up to this point, right? How much more aggressive can government be when it comes to enabling power sector generation? And I know you talk about a transition, that it's going to have to be a slow transition into renewables, but surely more can be done. We've already seen an opening up of this arena, but we need to see more support, I get a sense, of these decisions being made. The ruling that we've seen in terms of the opening up to private sector was groundbreaking, but it doesn't facilitate. There's nothing to facilitate the feed through to actual implementation.
No, I actually disagree. The kind of incentive for IPPs in South Africa is the best in the world. When you unpack IPPs, they get allocated quantum of energy to supply. They get treasury a backup. For every IPP, when you go into the treasury contingent liability, there is a treasury guarantee. They get a take-or-pay 20 years contract with Eskom. So the regime for IPPs is quite attractive in South Africa. Yes, there was a lull a few years ago. So there isn't anything else to do, in my view. All they need to do is to churn the windows and make them bigger, which I agree with. There isn't any country where you can build whatever you like without any permission. So anybody, Anglo wants to build a new gas power station, they can only tell government they can build it, right? So, but that is not going to solve the problem, because you see, private sector doesn't build for the public good. They build for their bottom line. And they can say they're going to build, and if their economic things change, they can stop. They don't have to ask permission from anybody. But the state has a role to make sure that power provision is there. So you need to still drive it. So what is needed for me is that I think we need an assertive state. At the moment, I think our state listens to everybody. The 8.5 for me it makes no difference. Let me be quite frank. Because it seeks to take planning out of government into the realm of international politics. Right? So the government is going to be tied themselves to loan confidence that you don't do this, you don't do that. No country that has developed very, very aggressively has done that. So you need a state that is assertive, that says this country has got an economy that can grow. On the back of that, the energy system of this economy is valuable. It can attract investment on its own without any support because the economy on its own has value to give to the world. China has grown to be the second largest economy in the world. It didn't ask for handouts. It did it because they were assertive, long-term thinking, but in multilateral discussion on the issue of energy transition, China said, we're not doing 2050 net zero. We're doing 2060. We're not tapering down. We will taper down our emission after 2030 because our trajectory in terms of development is different. They've taken 800 million people out of poverty in the past 20 years. Because the state is assertive, it talks to the world from a point of assertiveness, not from a point of weakness where they can throw 8.5 billion and you all of a sudden you have to rewire your energy system in reaction to that. So an assertive state that is clear in terms of its development mandate is what we need.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open up to you in just a bit. Before I do, Busi, big business response.
No. So I think I've got a problem, Ramaroha, with the statement that you're making that the 8.5 billion doesn't matter. It matters because we have taken it. I agree with you on that. If we knew that we were not planning to oblige the conditions that it came with, why did we take it? So I think that is the problem for me with the South African government. Remember, we were not offered this money on a silver platter. We actually went and made a business case for it at COP26 and were therefore given the money with conditions. So why didn't we then? So you see, that is the point I'm making, that we can't therefore be that insular in our thinking to think that we can do as we like. You take the 8.5 billion and then you disregard whatever conditions that it comes with. You sign the international treaty with ICC and you think you're going to host Putin. You can't. That is precisely the
Last
problem.
rebuttal before I have to obey this clock.
The point I'm making is an assertive state doesn't need to depend or make its energy development dependent on external funding.
That I agree with.
The point is, an assertive state can make a case for its economy and underpinned by its energy system. And the investment is not borrowings or grants. The investment becomes investments. South Africa has built this country based on international investment on the back of business case of the minerals in South Africa. Right? We can do the same. So, but once you become a state that's not assertive, and people, the 8.5 billion, in fact, in the investment program, the total amount is $99 billion. Now, in the context of 8.5 billion, it's minuscule. No. Right? So where is the other $80 billion going to come from? I'm talking that perspective. I'm not talking that if you've made the commitment, you must live up to them. That I agree. But what I'm saying is we cannot be a state that lives on handouts. And I think for what this country has, still in the ground, but still in its people, South Africa was ahead of China in terms of nuclear power, ahead of many countries in terms of power generation and transmission. We built the bomb, we decided not to use it. That's the level of technical prowess in South Africa that must harness. We shouldn't become, complacent and become dictated to. We can solve these issues ourselves. That's my point I'm making.
Okay, let's open up to the audience because we've got 5 minutes. And there is going to be a roving microphone doing the round. So ladies and gentlemen, please show by indication of hand whether you've got a question for any of our panelists this morning. The mic will find its way to you. While it does, do we have any hands up? There we go, right at the back.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Tebo Holififi. So I've got 2 questions to the panel. I think the first question is Sisbuzi spoke about a plethora of plans for Eskom that are there. It's just that nobody knows where they are. So my question is it not time that we move past planning and plans and get to implementing or execution of what needs to be done? So that's my first question. And then obviously, how do we do that if nobody actually knows, or if nobody is willing to show out these plans? How do we move past that? And then the second question is around, do you believe that unions, especially given that the tripartite alliance of the ruling government is there, do you believe that it plays a role in perpetuating the lack of political will, from making decisions, from the government making decisions and being assertive about their decisions? So those are my 2 questions. And
I think I counted 3, so let's hit pause there. Vusi, maybe tackle the first one because it's about having the blueprints in the cupboard. We've got enough of them, but implementation's challenging. So how do we move to that next stage if we don't know, never mind where the plans are, but what the plans are?
So we do know where the plans are. They are sitting with ministries. It's between DPE and DMRE. So it's not that we don't know where the plans are. But as soon as they get to DPE and DMRE, they go into some deep, dark hole where they cannot retrieve them and implement them. But you see, we can implement. And I think both Stephen and Ramaroha have spoken about we've got the capacity. We know what needs to be done. They've got the skill set. Even the diagnosis of what needs to be done is there. It's contained in all the plans. We're sitting with a leadership crisis. Yeah. The execution crisis that you're talking about is a leadership crisis. You see, you can't be a leader and avoid making tough decisions. You can't be a leader and think that in making the decisions that are going to change the economic trajectory around, you are still going to be popular and beloved by all. Being unpopular comes with the job. You see, if you are scared to make tough decisions and you want to make everyone happy, and I think it was Steve Jobs who said, then don't be a leader. Rather go and sell ice cream. Because then your only dilemma is chocolate or vanilla. And whether you get that wrong. So, and honestly, the leadership crisis that we're sitting with, it has seriously, Alicia, eroded the 2 currencies that you had left in this country. And those 2 currencies were hope and trust. And because we are failing to lead, we are failing to execute, as the gentleman is saying, people are sitting helpless and hopeless. And we are sitting in a very difficult position as a country.
Yeah. Jacob, maybe let's tag the second question to you here, right? Is the fact that we have a tripartite alliance hindering the leadership capabilities and, holding back political will? Is it playing a role in the lack of political will? That was the second question.
That's out of the scope of my competence, political science. But I think it goes beyond just tripartite alliance. We almost like in South Africa, we're almost like in an undeclared civil war between various formations, business, races, classes. It's undeclared. But some of these things become proxies of those civil wars. The energy system is a good proxy. Yeah. Some of the pronouncements are not necessarily the pronouncement about we believe in this, but it's a proxy for something else. For instance, the issue of IPPs versus Eskom may be a coal versus renewable a discussion. But underneath it, there's also a state versus private debate. So there are many proxy wars that are undeclared that manifest themselves in some of the things that we're doing, energy system being one of them.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about the industrial vision, the same, I think somebody talked about Jan Smuts and Hendrik van der Bijl. Yeah. When the Union of South Africa, after the Boer War, they created an industrial vision that brought in the English and the Afrikaner into an industrial plan that for the past 100 years has been what built the mining industry, what built the state-owned enterprises. We are not there yet. We have not had the honest conversation as South Africans. What is our total inclusive vision? Because if we don't, we have these proxy wars where the energy system is a political proxy war, a racial proxy war, a geopolitical proxy war. So unless we deal with those things, these things manifest in different ways.
Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have come to the end of this discussion. I told you, 45 minutes, just not enough time to tackle. But Stephen, Busi, Jacob, it's been a pleasure listening to you this morning. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your engagement as well. Gugu, I'm going to hand back to you.
I wish I could give you 2 more hours. But unfortunately, our time doesn't allow. But really pertinent insights that have been shared. And I think what has been underscored here is that whilst the plans might be in place, we're well aware of the challenges with the infrastructure, but it all boils down to leadership. Mm-hmm. A leadership deficit is clearly what we have here in the country in different aspects of the economy.
I'm going to tag a quick quote that I came across pertaining to leadership just this week, actually. You can't solve the same problem with the same people that created it. It noted the fact that, yes, people can change, but when the pattern continues and plays itself out again and again, you need to stop trying to change the minds of the people, but the people themselves, so that we actually see the change that we need.
I think we're all aware we're 12 months to an election?
There we go.
You know what to do. Register to vote. I won't tell you who to vote for, but register. That's clearly what we need to do. Thank you so much, Alicia, as well as your panelists, for an incredible conversation that has left us energized to hopefully find ways again for sourcing the challenges to electricity that we have in South Africa. We trust that many of you have enjoyed this conversation. We will take a quick breather, but a gentle reminder to those of you joining us online, as well as those of you present in the room. In the next 15 minutes, we're going to come back. And we're going to have a conversation that will focus on the role and function of technology, how it intersects with business as well as communities, all in the drive of maintaining sustainability. So we do want you to stretch your legs, get a quick refreshment, come back with a revived mind, and we will continue this conversation. And last session for the day in the next 15 minutes, prioritizing a focus on technology and its intersection on business as well as communities. We'll see you in 15 minutes. Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, those of you present here in the room, and of course, those of you joining us online for the 2023 Directors event. I think for many of us who started off this morning, we're well aware that we've had quite a lot of information to absorb by underscoring this topical theme of sustainability. We've evaluated how South African businesses do need to prioritize social development, re-energizing, and of course, seeking alternative power solutions to our energy crisis. But we do need to bear in mind that, as you can tell, there's a fine up on stage and one that will be moderated phenomenally. Why? Because the individual who will be moderating this particular panel discussion, my good colleague in the industry, Faith Mangwape, well-respected TV and radio broadcaster, but also happens to be someone with a keen interest in technology as well as leadership through her own institution. And this will enable us to have a conversation that will unpack the role and function of technology, the theme being the hum of tech-savvy businesses and communities, how policies do intercept with big businesses who are also leveraging opportunities within technology, how multinational consultancies are making sure that we are globally competitive, yet locally relevant, and most importantly, making sure that the impact on the ground is felt through development centers in the form of non-profit organizations. So, those of you watching again online, and to those of you in the room, do be mindful that we will be keen to take your questions, which will be addressed by Faith. And of course, we will ensure that we leave you invigorated from this conversation, because it's quite a tone that's been set this morning, Faith, but I have, a clear understanding that you'll take it to a whole nother level when it comes to technology. Please warmly welcome Faith Mangwape, as well as our panelists on stage.
Sure. Thank you very, very much, Gugu. Definitely trying to do justice to what has been said this morning. A very good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen, as said by my lovely colleague, Gugu, that my name indeed is Faith Mangwape, and it's an absolute honor and a privilege to be in your company today to facilitate a conversation that I think we need to have, particularly now where the world is moving, the global community, and finding ways to position South Africa within that context. And how is it that we can find positioning adequately without having to talk about technology, the move of technology, smart technologies, and being able to build sustainable businesses in South Africa, but also look at it how that building of sustainable businesses translates to economic as well as community impact. And with that, help me welcome our guests this morning for the discussion. We're joined by Arnold Nechambiri, CEO of Pambane Technology Development Center, who really has been in this space since about 1998. So for Arnold, wave at everybody. Very good morning to you. It's going to get controversial. I'm making them friendly while we start. We're also joined by Ketiwe Nkuna, who's responsible for business executive at Accenture in Africa. Ketiwe, wave there. Look at her. She's matching with me. She got the memo. Very good morning to you, Ketiwe. Joseph Ndaba joins us for our Commissioner, Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Joseph, wave. Just to share you a little bit of an insight on Joseph, when we were preparing for this conversation, he asked me, he said, do you want me to behave or not? And I told him, I do not want you to behave. So whatever you're going to get today, you're going to get it. We're also joined by the Chief Financial Officer of BCX, Zweli Vilagazi. Zweli, please wave to everybody. And, you know, as we're talking about sustainable business development within the South African context and how is it that we can do so quite practically, we need to be able to talk significantly about digital transformation, Joseph. We can't talk about penetration without talking about transformation. And how are we faring when it comes to private sector as well as public sector transformation? And the way in which we're able to adopt it within the South African context. Just give us an overview picture in terms of exactly what are we dealing with here?
Hey, Faith. Yeah, no. I actually take this in three different levels. When you look at the private sector, we are doing okay as the country because, like, for an example, look at now, BCX has managed to put this together. So clearly, with the private sector, we are coming all right. You go to the SMMEs. SMMEs are actually trying, you know, as much as it's difficult because of things like the cost of data, you see, but they're actually trying to make sure that now they are moving away from the traditional way of doing business to the digital platforms. You see, the availability of digital tools is actually making it even more easier for them to actually be able to tap into these digital technologies. The only problem that you are sitting with when you look mostly at the SMMEs, most of them, they still don't understand where to go and how to get there. You see that? Because everybody's talking about these new technologies, but nobody's actually talking to say where to go for you to be able to start using these new technologies. Because like now, you know, we are talking to the converted in this room. You see that? Where are the SMMEs that you actually need to be talking to right now to tell them, you know what, here is the platform that you can actually be able to use for you to actually now do your digital marketing easily, for you to start marketing your products online. Because currently when you are looking for certain products, you cannot actually find them, but we have this product in this country. Because SMMEs are not so much exposed to these digital platforms. You see. And you go to government. The people that's supposed to make our life easy, seems like it's the same people who are making our lives difficult. You see. Especially when you look in the space of the SMME. We still have this legacy culture in this country to say, you know, we cannot be able to move to digitally because things has been happening like this, so we are okay with it. We are confident to say you can still do it. You see that? We have been in a space whereby you take municipalities for an example. What stops municipalities right now to go and adopt blockchain technology, for an example? Because there's a whole lot of corruption happening there. But they know because once we go and then take upon technologies like blockchain, we know exactly that is going to stop us from actually having brown envelopes. You see. So in that case now, it becomes a hindrance for government to actually say, okay, here is digital transformation. Let's fully adopt digital transformation as departments. You see. And the other thing that you're looking at is policies. You know, most of the policies that you are sitting with in this country, they're actually hindering the implementation of these new technologies. Because our policies are not actually talking to the future. And you have a young person that actually comes into the sector who wants to make a change using technology. But because of the policies, they actually cannot be able to implement these things. Like for a typical example, you want to implement a certain innovation. And then you go to government department, they will tell you that, you know, procurement processes and that innovation is new and it has to be implemented. You see, the other thing that you need to be looking at is skills. We don't have a lot of skills, unfortunately. You see, we don't have a lot of skills within this departments because, for an example, I was talking to one of the colleagues to say, right now we need to be looking at data analysts. You see, for us to be able to now say, we have been doing things like this, now let's actually start using data to actually give us informed decisions for us to know where to go. So, you know, with the private sector, like I said, we are doing okay. SMMEs, you know, they are trying, but the problem it is still sitting with government to say they are not actually creating an enabling space for us to actually be able to apply digital transformation.
I want to be able to hop on what you've just said, and labor specifically when it comes to small business development. Zweli, you cannot develop small businesses if A, you don't have the technologies that Joseph was referring to, right? B, you don't have the power supply to enable the technology that you were referring to. So it's just the basics here, right? And yet we have to speak about the new types of technologies that are available to make doing business easier. Because there are technologies that are available for such. But just take us through them. And you're absolutely right, Joseph. The people that should be in this room are the small businesses so that they can learn, right, from this church. Say amen.
Amen.
So in that instance, what are some of those new technologies? And more than anything else, how beneficial, you know, can they be to sustainable business development?
Faith, let me start at the simplistic level. I'm going to try and put this at 3 levels. And I think all the time when we talk about digital transformation, we talk about technologies, we always think about it as a very complex concept of cloud, cybersecurity, these big servers. But think about it within the South African environment. You've got 72% penetration of mobile phones, and a large proportion of that being smartphones. You've got a very pervasive mobile and fixed network, which allows people to have access. On top of that mobile phone, there are many applications that you can use, whether you are an ordinary person, whether you are a small business. But come back to small businesses. Think about it. A typical small business person, I'm not talking about the lady probably at the corner selling fat cook, but any person who's got a small business, running a small business, has got the chance now to use a mobile phone or other technologies to be able to do so. Whether that person is accessing cloud, we were talking earlier with my panel members that actually when people think about cloud, they always think about private cloud servers and with blinking lights and all of that and a network connected to it. Within your mobile phone, you have access to cloud. Every time you save information into your mobile phone, you have access, whether you are on Apple, on other phones, you are saving information in the cloud. But also, they protect you using cybersecurity capabilities. Yes, we talk a lot about AI and the impact of AI in communities. But already AI is largely embedded in some of the applications that you use on a daily basis, whether you are searching on a search engine, whether you're using certain applications, already they're beginning to embed those. So already as a small business, already as an ordinary person, you are already using cloud capabilities, you're already using AI capabilities and also cybersecurity capabilities because you have to be protected. And I think the barrier to entry has been reduced by technology. You need allowed small business to market on platforms that ordinarily will be, in the past, would be accessed by corporates because they've got the money to invest in it. You can today, as a small business, advertise on many of the social platforms that are available. Many communities, for that matter, are able through platforms to be able to communicate on many matters, whether you are sitting on a platform like WhatsApp or Twitter, or on any other platforms as well. You are able to communicate, Facebook, you're able to communicate. And I'm going to make a very small, simple example. I met a young person who wanted to actually open up a business. So I said to the young person, so you want to open up a business, you need funding. So how are you going to market your business? And and he said, we've got a community Facebook platform where I'll be able to market my products and I'm going to be able to get customers. So those barriers that were there before for small businesses, technology is enabling them to really have access to that. And I'm hoping little bit later, I'm going to talk to Joseph about a little bit about some of the things he spoke about government and digitalization, because I've got just a view on that.
Well, we're definitely going to be able to facilitate this part, but also I want to make sure that everybody's given an opportunity to pose questions to our panelists. If you've got questions and comments, please do so. I am able to field some of those, and I do see some of those comments already coming in. I'd love to keep this session as interactive as possible. So those that are with the roving mic, just make sure that you just alert me to who's ever in the room. There we go. That's perfect. Whoever's in the room that would like to pose a question to our panelists, and let's just do it and keep it as conversational as possible, because I have many questions that are beginning to come in already. But before we go into the questions, Arno, maybe let's talk a little bit about the digital skills gap.
Yes.
And again, it was what Joseph started with about skills deficit that we're currently faced with, right? Are we aligned in terms of, number one, what the country needs in relation to the global community? And where are we sitting here when it comes to the skills gap kind of dissemination? It's one thing to know what skills you require. It's a different ballgame altogether to disseminate that knowledge and say, guys, this is what we need to fill the skills gap. But if we're not doing this, then it becomes completely pointless. So how are we faring?
So, look, the digital skills gap, for it to be sorted out or resolved, especially within the civil society organization, is going to be very difficult. Difficult because and I've had, previous panelists talked a lot about partnership and collaboration. Mm. Within the civil society organization, this is where we shouldn't just talk about it, but implement it. For example, we provide technology capacity building to organizations throughout the communities. And during the COVID pandemic, we were training organizations to adopt cloud technology so that they're able to work from home, because we were not able to go to work. How would they do that? One, and we need partnership from private sector. For private sector, it was easier for them to work from home. They have the ability. They were able to purchase devices. They have access to connectivity. The sector, the civil society organization, that's where the challenges are, because one, we were using our desktops. Where do we get laptops? Laptops are expensive. Where are the hardware companies that can support civil society organizations? Where are the mobile operators that can also support the work that we as civil society organizations are doing? So now we have to work. We work in the fields, work from home. We have no capacity to adopt, how do we have online meetings, without connectivity, hardware devices. So we were sitting in a challenge of, as much as we are training these organizations on cloud technology, look, host your AGM online, host your board meetings online, and we're training on them on that. But they were like, okay, you have this, and again, we were fortunate that we were able to, we have the partnership with some of the technology companies that we administer donated software solutions, like your Microsoft, Google, Zoom, and all that. And then, yes, you have this Microsoft cloud technology that is there. Organizations can benefit at no cost. But then, there's the mismatch of, they don't have the correct devices. They don't have access to connectivity in some of these areas. We need private sector to partner with us so that those civil society organizations, one, have the ability, can also access, those, devices. Could be, a smartphone, because, you can join a Teams meeting on a cell phone. The access to, these resources, if we have access to that, the skills gap or the digital divide would actually be resolved. But we do require, as much as people have been talking about partnership, collaboration, we work with all these organizations in all these communities. We always go with different, routers so that we train them. But then after training them, what else are we? Where are some of the partners from private sector that we can say, look, now that we have trained you on this technology, and now you have the skills, you now have the capacity to implement this. We can, let's say Telkom, we can go to Telkom to say, look, in this area, organizations don't have access to connectivity. Again, yes, we're trying our best to reach out to corporates, but, it's very difficult to reach out to corporate companies. I remember when I was calling for, I called MTN, or, they're here or not, but I called MTN, trying to connect with MTN Foundation to just get an email address for the general manager for MTN Foundation. They were saying, no, you can't get it. So we are on the civil society, and the private sector have the resources. How do we have this match? Have this collaboration where it's implementable. So there is that gap where civil society on this side, yes, private sector is doing a lot. It's just that, how do we access to that? How do we tap into some of the initiatives that are aimed into communities, that are aimed into civil society organizations? So there's that mismatch where you find that we, as civil society organization, we might not even know what, let's say, ABSA is doing, what Telkom is doing, what BCX is doing. How do we come together so that we provide we build a solution such that when we train on these digital skills, organizations or community members now have the ability to continue that and also adopt.
I completely hear you with that. It's almost like we're dealing with a bottleneck problem here. Yeah. The skills and the resources are all sitting at the top. And right at the bottom, it's completely empty. From middle to bottom, it's just completely empty. But then, Ketiwe, then it raises the question around the conceptualization of 4IR. I mean, I remember when we were talking about 4IR and how we're going to digitize ourselves and how we're going to build this digital economy that everybody's going to benefit from. South Africans were clapping. It was, yes, we went to the next frontier. And so until you get to the reality and the implementation of how exactly that would see itself materialize, especially when it comes to community development, does that mean that 4IR and its concept in the South African context is an elusive dream?
Thank you so much, Faith. So I think, in my opinion, I believe that there's still an opportunity for us to seize the opportunity that lies in 4IR. Technology really holds the promise to resolve some of our biggest challenges, as South Africa and even the continent, right? If we talk about agriculture, if we talk about health, These technologies really do have the potential to address our challenges. And I'll build on from what Arnold was saying around the disconnect with regards to civil society as well as industry. For me, the opinion that I have is really that we need to have an intentional collaborative effort put in place where private sector, government, the civil society, as well as our academic sphere work together, because the only way we can leverage and tap into this opportunity is by addressing our skilling challenges and the gaps that exist. And currently, there are a number of initiatives that you'd hear about. For example, Accenture's got the Skills to Succeed program, where we've worked with 5 NGOs over the last 5 years, and we've trained over 25,000 young people, and 85% of those young people have gone into jobs. How we know this is because we obsess on the data gathering, and we obsess on the quality and the impact, rather than a spray and pray approach, where we say, we've trained this number of people, and chasing BEE points, rather than the intentionality of saying, we really want to make a sustainable impact in the country. And by working in pockets, this actually defeats the purpose, because we're not scaling. It's just small pockets of excellence. It's really then leveraging existing platforms. So how do we, as the industry sitting here together today, collaborate and work with SA Youth, for example, which is a presidential initiative to address youth unemployment, and they have a digital opportunity skill. So how does industry then come together to actually contribute and open up opportunities in their organizations to then absorb these young people that actually get trained? How do we make sure that we understand what demand looks like? What are the skills that we need? What are we solving for? That's where we have things like artificial intelligence and predictive analytics to tell us that we currently have a deficit of coders, for example. And what we should start building now, which is going to be in demand in 2 years, is this. And we start building for it, rather than a reactive approach where it's really reacting because we hear now that in the digital space, let's say, for example, data analytics, which was mentioned earlier on, is something that's in demand. And we react only now. So it really does take intentionality. And I think beyond the post-school level, it's starting from cradle. It's starting from the ECD centers and making sure that we are building ECD centers that prepare our young people for the modern space. This shouldn't only be for the likes of people that are in the middle class. How do we enable young people in Jozini? There's a community that we work with in Ndumo that's off the border of Mozambique, where it's off-grid and there is no connectivity. We've set up an ICT center and an innovation center where young people come to the center to actually be trained, not to go to Durban if they want to access education. How do we replicate those to make sure that it is easily accessible at grassroots level, and well coordinated? There's actually one initiative that I've had the opportunity to be exposed to, which we'll be launching soon, which is called the Collective X. And what the Collective X aims to do is really accelerating digital skilling in South Africa and making sure that the quality of standard that we are actually training is actually competitive to an India. We can't say we want to compete with India and keep work onshore if our skill set are not at a India level. Are we competing at a global level? So for us to be able to do this, it's not only focusing on the youth that are already in the NEET population, but we need to start from grassroots level to entrench 4IR and technology in our education system.
Definitely hear you on that one. I'm going to read out a couple of your comments, and then we're going to move on to taking some of the questions as well that have been posed. And if there are questions in the room, I'll just take a gander around the room, and then we'll just be able to field some of those questions that were thrown. But I've got a comment here. This is a problem that requires tackling from all sectors at all levels, requiring leadership that is prepared to listen and engage unconditionally. I'm going to come to you on that one. And then a question is, how then do we start reconciling these AI fears? Joseph, let's talk about that as well. The reconciliation of AI fears, particularly in the South African context. I remember when we were talking about 4IR, once again, the big pushback came in from even certain sectors, such as the mining sector, saying they're going to take away our jobs. Right? You're going to introduce machines and you're going to automate, but how am I going to feed my family if you do that? Right?
Yeah.
That requires a different kind of thinking and diversification, obviously, of skill set. How do we start addressing that at a large context?
You know, by the time the commission was put in place, one of the challenges that we face in this country is like, you guys want to take our jobs. That is why you are there. You exist because you don't want to see us happy. And I actually understood where the communities are coming from, because the way it has been presented in this country, it is not the right way. It's like technology is here to actually take everything. And then, you know, you go and try to have a conversation with people who needs to pass the message to the communities, which is municipalities. And for the fact that they also are afraid of this new technologies, they don't even take the message to the communities. And if they do, they actually take the wrong message to the communities. Whereby now we are actually ending up sitting with a serious problem to say people are actually rejecting something that they don't even know, because the message that has been taken to them is a wrong message. You see, we actually need to start talking like you were saying with communities. In terms of community centers, we need to actually go down to the ground and say, for IR, it is not this big thing that is taking jobs. But for IR is actually here to assist you, you know, to open up new industries, you know, to open up the door that actually been closed, you know, to bring you closer to the development that like other countries are actually exposed to.
Yeah.
So we need to have different conversation about these new technologies. You talk about AI. Everybody thinks now, no, AI, you know, they look at Chat GPT. The way it has been presented, it is actually wrong, because it actually brings fear to the communities. It brings fear to the country to say, these new technologies, they are not advancing the country, but they're actually taking things from us.
Sure. And certainly then, Zweli would also explain why is it that, never mind the skills deficit that we're facing with, but how much there's not adoption, particularly from Black African women. And I'm going to take it there because I run an institution that exists to educate and equip Black African women with skills, particularly within the 4IR space. And what I found with dealing with some of these girls is first of all, how a community is going to see me if I'm this woman that likes to deal with technology, right? That's not the woman's job. You're not supposed to be interested in technology. Secondly, is where am I going to find a job? Right? And that speaks significantly to the public partnership that you were referring to. But if the private sector does not adopt or does not absorb these Black African women, then we're going to have, once again, this bottleneck. So then how do you speak to private sector organizations who are listening and saying, this is all great, but what is in it for me?
Yep.
If I take in 5, 10, 30 women within this with the skills and competencies, what am I getting out of it besides a BEE tick?
And Faith, I can say without any doubt, from our experience as a BCX and for that matter within the telecom group, is that we've seen really the shift. A lot of the young people that come into our spaces, whether it's interns, whether it's some of the programs that we ran with the universities where we've partnered with them, that we saw the intake that young women are really taking on technology. Even with the coding, the program that you're running is probably a good example. But there's many other examples where we partner with other partners where a lot of young women are part of that. Yes, there's still a dominance of males in this sector, particularly white males because of the history that we have. But that's changing, and we are seeing the change. And the good thing about technology is that young people are really embracing technology. Africa being a young country, we are seeing that the adoption and that rate of change is actually happening. And I just want to make a few examples. I mean, it is very important that we realize that tech has helped change the space in the health sector, particularly in education. What happened during COVID was a very good example of what, universities started giving devices to students. A lot of students that couldn't go to school used to use their devices to be able to attend classes. So we must see technology as really enabling communities to have access. Yes, if you don't have a smartphone, it becomes a challenge. My colleagues, spoke about, the issue of, the load shedding. What happens to the infrastructure? Suddenly, the network is no longer the mobile network. Yes, those are the issues. The mobile network that we have in the country may not be reaching every part of the country. But at 72% coverage of the country, that's very good. I think we always see ourselves as really behind, but I still believe that such a network could be utilized appropriately. Even some of the civil society organizations where there may be challenges, I think, yes, as the private sector, as business, we can do better to more reach out, because this way around is them coming through to us, and access can be a challenge in a big corporate environment to get to the top. But I think that as business, and that's a challenge that I pose to all of us that are here, that maybe it's about time that we reach out more, particularly as the ICT sector. But I think that from a BCX perspective, from a Telecom perspective, from the Telecom Foundation, we actually deployed online capabilities for many of the schools that we are supporting, for students to do a lot of the subjects, and we're checking on their progress that they are making. Future Makers, my colleague, spoke about how small businesses were supported. So technology is enabling breaking barriers to entry, having more access that will have not been there before.
I've got another comment, and one to you, Ketu, saying, well said, Ketu. I totally agree with your view, the all-encompassing approach, and also inculcating the AI culture as early as the earliest level of education. But then I want to put the very same, question to you as well, Ketu, that we train them. We equip them with the skills. We equip them with the knowledge, whether it's through Java, coding, artificial intelligence, data analytics, and the like, and some of the programming languages that are coming out right now. So we do all of this, right, in the hope of upskilling our society and diversifying our economic impact, right? The very same people we train will say, South Africa is not a place to make money. Let me take my skills elsewhere where I'm needed, in Europe. Let me take my skills and make more money in America. So how then do you start training so that you can see your return on investment? Because so long as you train and then they leave you, it's a bottomless pit here.
Yeah. I think you're raising a very important point, Faith, and I think we've seen a rise of that, I think, with the recent uncertainties in the country, right? So there are things that we probably don't have control of in terms of the country, but I think how organizations can also make sure that they are retaining young people is adapting to the new times, right? Having a really good value proposition for young people. Millennials are very different from generations that came before, so how do you make sure that you embed purpose, for example, into everything that you do as an organization? Because millennials are very purpose-centered and want to work for organizations that they know are actually contributing to the communities they care about. Once they come in as well, let the young people not be seen as, just a black female or a young black person, but it's a competent and capable young person. And let the path be clear in terms of trajectory. How are they going to be growing within the organization? How are they going to be adding value? We really need to be creative around making sure that we allow and enable these young people to flourish in the organizations. That's one part. The other part is also just encouraging those very same people to also start their own businesses and be prospective employers. What does online work look like? Where it's maybe retaining the talent within South Africa and they're doing gig work that might be work that is across the continent. So it will take a number of different approaches, to make sure that we are actually creating those opportunities for those young people to actually use the talent that they've actually developed. I think another trend that we've seen, and it links back again with the BEE, is young people being perceived as perpetual potential, to have perpetual potential. So these young people will move from one learnership to the next because private sector or industry is actually just looking at the BEE points rather than the inclusion and enablement of young people for them to actually make livelihoods, So it really does require us thinking very differently, and seeing the talent and giving the opportunities to these young people that we do see upright, regardless of where they come from. I often say that talent is dispersed equally, but opportunities aren't. So how do we make sure that the young people that are in Northwest, that are in Limpopo, those that do have the potential, are enabled for them to actually succeed and get into these programs, and from the programs, get into the world of work.
You were speaking about earlier on, Arnold, about how a lot of these NGOs require the resources.
Yes, yes.
But in order for you to attract the resources, you need to position yourself right. And I wonder how many of the NGOs, and look, I first to raise my hand and say we have to take a reflective perspective if we're truly going to address the issue of sustainable digital penetration, especially within the South African context, right? But that also starts with NGOs not necessarily doing things the way it used to be done. Because you're not going to attract a B6. You have to be able to knock on Zweli's off, and he has to open the door, right? But you have to be able to position yourself right and get your messaging right so that he is curious enough to open for you. Are NGOs doing that?
It's a good question, because especially when you think about technology. So when you start an organization, you see a need in the community. And when you see the need in the community, it's now about how do you create a proper, how do you have a good storytelling so that, because corporates, we submit so many proposals, and during the discussions that we have with corporate companies, the thinking is not different. It is completely different from what we have. We're more like, I want to implement, I want to do this, of which the corporates, they've impact, whatever, which, you start an organization with limited knowledge, right? And we do need private sector to also assist us on unpacking our good proposals, because we know what we're doing and we know what we need, but the challenge is on the storytelling. How do we sell our story better? How do we tell our story better so that it makes sense to someone who is reading somewhere, So that's where I think we're lacking, because we have the basic, this is what we're doing, and we make an impact this way. How we tell it is completely different from the understanding from the sector. And I see it when we send our proposals, because we have our own thinking, and the corporate sector has a different thinking. And if we know they guide us as well, again, it goes with the partnership, because if the corporate foundation, or CSI value the impact that we're doing in our communities, they will actually assist us to say, look, this is how we unpack it this way. Like kind of volunteer some of our services to us so that, this is how we can tell our story better. So that when they, because there has to be someone who has to approve that proposal or that project that we aim to do in our communities. But how we tell our stories, that's where I think we do need proper assistance from, because they start, in what we are saying, and the bigger, all this terminology. Remember, these are organizations in the communities. And when it has to be approved by, the senior leaders of the language is not clear. We just speak, okay, we want to do this. This is where we're
What I've noticed about that, actually, as you're speaking on it, is that NGOs speak heart. Corporates speak head.
Yes.
Right? And there will consistently be a disconnect if you're not able to merge the heart and the head. You wanted to add to that, Kitty?
So I also wanted to just add the role of just corporate in capacity building, right? So Arnold touched on it. How do you leverage the wealth of knowledge that is in our people for people to actually do skills-based volunteering in NGOs? Because that is how we're going to be able to transfer skills, and making sure that these NGOs, it's also not a once-off hit, but an ongoing partnership where you see the NGO, and I've got an example. Arnold was actually speaking about one of those NGOs that I found when I started at Accenture. And we've continued to work with them. And really, when we started, even basic things like governance weren't in place. Reporting, monitoring, and evaluation went in place. By But by working with them, giving them the feedback and guiding and coaching them and working with them as a partner, you mentioned it, Arnold, working with them as a partner and having vested interest, rather than what I mentioned previously, a spray and pray approach and a tick box approach, really being very targeted and working together is the way to really bridge the gap to make sure that we are transferring those skills.
We've got a couple of more comments and questions. Can the private sector come out openly on what digital skills are needed that hopefully would allow government to intervene and correct the market failures? Where is this data? If it is as if we hear and talk about skills deficit, but with no specifics. So can the private sector come out openly on what digital skills are needed that would hopefully allow government to intervene? Maybe let's start with that, Joseph.
Yeah, I think from the private sector, they would actually tell you to say, this is our plan. Those are the skills that we are looking for. And it's upon the NGOs to actually come and then say, communities, this is the skills that you actually need to actually start developing. You see that? So for private sector, I think it is clear. The problem goes with the government side. You see that? Because there's no clear to say these are the skills that you are looking for. I'll give you an example. We run the Innovation Hub at Northwest in Mafike. You see that? We have graduate programs that we have in there. One of the graduate programs is an AI software developers. So when these guys graduate, they cannot be able to be employed anywhere because of the skill that they are sitting with. It is not actually needed in the province. But the province knows that we need to have new skills, but you give them these skills, but they actually don't know where to place these guys. You see that? Now, that's the problem that we are sitting with. For an example, I got guys that are actually working for India now, but they're based at the hub within Mafike because of the future of work. You see that? Because we have seen to say, let's rather take this approach and expose these young people that are still sitting in South Africa to other countries so as they can work for them, because where we are in South Africa, they actually can be placed anywhere. We are just training for the sake of training, just to have a tick boxes, but there's not actually a proper industry or a proper pathway to say, after we train these people, this is where we are actually putting them. You see? So in South Africa, we need to stop this thing of, just training and training. Also, private sector needs to stop giving a whole lot of money for people just to keep on training, and we don't know what we are training for. Because now we're actually creating another problem that we have a whole lot of young people with 3-week skills, and to them, they are fully qualified, they can do the job, but technically they can't because of what we just need to have tick boxes. So we need to have an honest conversation to say that which skills are going to drive this country forward. We need to go back to the cities and say, cities, which skills based on the data that you are sitting with, which skills do we actually need in this country? So as we train the right people, the NGOs actually get the right budget for them to train right young people for the economy. Because right now we're not training for this economy. I don't know what we are training for.
All right. In South Africa, what is the current plan for government to fast-track the use of blockchain technology to improve the efficiency in policy compliance and potential reduction of corruption? Let me start off with you as well, Joseph, and then I'll go to you as well, Joseph.
Again, Faith, how do we adopt technologies like blockchain if people don't even understand what is blockchain? You see, as a young person that is coming from the university, you actually, you understand, blockchain can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and as soon as the people that needs to hire you to actually come and implement that skills in government, they're actually afraid to say, what is the implication of us hiring this young person? They're not going to hire you because they know once you come in, you're actually going to make things right. And right now, a lot of people don't want to see things right because when things are right, they actually don't eat.
In other words, there's no room for corruption.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Because blockchain is going to stop that from happening. So how then do we adopt technologies that are going to stop us from doing the wrong things that we are doing? So those are the things that we actually need to have proper conversation about. Here are the new skills. We need these skills, and then things like your basic blockchain technology. Let's implement blockchain technology so as it can actually stop a whole lot of misuse of funds within, your public sector.
And that's going to require a lot of work, especially from the private sector, and intentionality. Not just because I need to get the points at the end, right? It needs us to say, I'm actually invested. And actually, as well, it requires an element of patriotism. I'm invested in seeing this country work. Is private sector interested in seeing South Africa work?
Very much so. Very much so. And I'm going to make a few use cases that are very good examples.
Gotcha.
You saw what the private sector did during COVID. Got together, developed applications, put infrastructure, supported government in making sure that we manage the pandemic. But they went beyond that. They are made available to communities and institutions technologies that will enable people to either study or be serviced. And I want to make very good examples of this. I know we always bash government on a few things, but I want to make good examples. I was renewing my car license the last time. Actually, I thought I had to go to the municipality to do so, but I actually went online and actually renewed it. Got delivered at my house. I went to one of the banks, I'm not going to mention names, standing there at the queue, and I said to them, you are much taking longer than Home Affairs now.
Yeah.
Because I can book from home to renew my ID or my passport. And I did that. And I went, and actually when I got to queue, I didn't have to stand. I went straight in because I knew at what time. Yeah. And as the private
about 30
sector,
seconds, I'm just letting you know.
100%. Yeah. As BCX also, we are looking at a few other technologies like in the health sector, in the education sector, where government could be really supported. Yes, we can do better. There's no doubt about it. And I think it would be wrong of us to assume that we can't do better. In training, for example, closing the digital divide and bringing in technologies in the public sector, absolutely. And I truly believe that government is actually doing quite a lot through CETA in making sure that to transform. They're not where they're supposed to be. They could do better. But we are seeing more and more technologies taking place, and I've made those examples that I'm seeing, improvement from the government side.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of our session, but much appreciated for your time as well. And thank you so much for lending us your ears as well. We've got a couple of questions from can I give you a minute? If I Google's just look at me with the evil eye. So if I run over, we are in big trouble. But I do see a hand raised. Let's just get the microphone very quickly.
Thank you, Program Director. I'll be very quick. I'm Rudy Peterson from UJ. Just a comment was an important point about the skills gap. We're training people and they are not able to be employed. That's a big problem. So I just wanted to check, you mentioned earlier the big challenge of collaboration approach, which I think is at the core of the problem. Now, I'm from UJ. We were leaders in the 4IR. In fact, our VC served on the presidential 4IR commission. But I think the problem we have as a nation is that we are not talking to one another. The left hand does not know what the right hand is doing.
Yeah.
Things are happening all over the place, and that affects, and that's why there's the problem of service delivery. So I just wanted to check with you in terms of what is the actual suggestions of this collective edge and collaborative approach. And then the last one to our president.
So I'm going to only allow one question, just simply because I am over time, and I want to give respect to the actual time that we've got. Literally, very short answer. You can go ahead.
So Collective X is an initiative that's actually driven by industry, working with government. And this new organization really aims to also work with the SETAs and leverage the SETA contributions that companies are making. And private sector coming to the party is really understanding and being clear about what skills are needed in industry. Collective X will then work with the NGO partners that are delivering to then make sure that the training is standardized, the training is of the same caliber across, regardless of whether someone's trained in Northwest, KZN, or in Gauteng. And this is a long-term initiative, and I think over the next 10 years, aims to really move the dial around accelerating digital skilling in South Africa.
Thank you very much. Won't you just give them a round of applause, our panelists? We've got Arno de Chambidi, Ketu Nkuna, Joseph Ndaba, Zweli Vigalazi. And ladies and gentlemen, it's been an absolute honor and a privilege to facilitate this conversation with you around digital transformation. I definitely, from what I gather with even the comments, it certainly has sparked a lot of conversations, and the conversations keep going. But for myself as well, thank you very much, and I hand you back to my wonderful colleague, Gugu.
Thank you so much, Faith. Please give them a round of applause. I think this has been a really insightful conversation. Thank you so much. As you make your way off stage, I believe very critical aspects that have definitely been highlighted by several of our panelists throughout the course of the day today. Thank you again, Arnold, Ketiwe, Joseph, as well as Zweli, updating us on the final conversation that we've had for today, the intersection of technology together with communities. And I'm hoping that this is refreshing for a number of you, right? As we walk forward and, of course, try to draw some sense of inspiration from the multitude of opinions that we've heard this morning. I'm tempted to ask many of you how you're feeling now. Is there still a glass? Is it half full? Is it half empty? Maybe by show of hands. Half full? Okay, a few of you are more optimistic. Half empty? Show of hands? Okay, some of you, you're still unsure. Anyone who says there's no glass? Oh, one hand at the back. You happen to agree with the former Statistician General. And why we actually have these conversations, it's been a reminder today as we reflect on the various themes that we've discussed that there are a number of Ps that happen to pop up. Policy was one of them. The tools to actually unlock the opportunities to drive sustainability within South Africa's economy. Partnerships. It's been very clear that we can't change the level of sustainability within our economy unless we interact with each other as various stakeholders. Another pertinent aspect, of course, is profit. You need productivity in order to drive profit for the financial investments to take place in order to enable and unlock opportunities within sustainability. And our people. Skills has been highlighted as a major concern. And one of the aspects that the Statistician General highlighted today that made me uncomfortable in my seat is the fact that it will be impossible to close the skills gap in South Africa. And I think each and every one of us here in this room who are fortunate enough to be employed, fortunate enough to have some form of economic means and access and decision-making skills and capabilities, know that we cannot allow impossible to happen. And on that note, I do want to leave you with a quote by former statesman of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, who's often said that it often seems impossible until it's done. So that is the challenge that we have ahead of us today as South Africans. Those of you who have joined us online, those of you who have joined us here in person, we thoroughly appreciate the knowledge, the insight, and the inputs that you've shared. And most importantly, we also like to acknowledge and thank our various speakers, our various moderators who've encouraged us in conversation today to make sure that as we move away from these conversations, that we have an opportunity to drive, influence, and impact the consequences of our outcomes and impact. And as one of our keynote sponsors has highlighted earlier today, Jonas Bohoshi, asking us what is the legacy we're going to leave behind. It's today that following these conversations through ongoing collaborative efforts that we'll be able to rewrite, redefine, and maybe recreate what that legacy is, not only for South Africa, but the leaders who are at the helm. On that note, we'd like to thank our key sponsors as well, BCX. Thank you so much for your ongoing engagement and participation, not forgetting the ongoing collaborative efforts that we have with the Institute of Directors of South Africa for their ongoing support and partnership. And most of all, as pop stars typically say, I'd like to thank you and you and you and you and you and you at home for your participation throughout today's conversation. In as much as the team here working together to create this event is here and present and works for months on end to create phenomenal conversations that we hope you engage in. We are appreciative of the fact that you've acknowledged their efforts by being present, actively participating, staying online, and of course asking your questions. So on behalf of the team that's put together the 2023 Directors event for this year, we wish you a profitable day, and most importantly, one that's filled with purpose and impact. Thank you so much.